He hung limp in the monster's grasp, the cold stone of the dungeon wall at his back. As the creature's claws tightened around his throat, he could only curse his own mediocrity, a jack-of-all-trades who had mastered nothing and was now paying the ultimate price for his lack of focus. The memory of past failures stung worse than the physical blows he had endured. Voices from his previous life echoed in his mind, reminding him of the harsh truth he had always tried to outrun, that he was a nobody who would never amount to anything because he refused to specialize. As he tumbled through the air, the world spinning into a blur of gray and shadow, he stared wide-eyed at the abyss. This version of himself, the one currently facing death in a dark pit, felt like a cruel punchline to a joke he had been telling for years. Not long ago, he had stood in the middle of a bustling city street, arms raised in a bizarre triumph. He had just achieved a dubious milestone, being fired from his 100th job, a feat that left him laughing hysterically while onlookers passed by in confusion, wondering why a man in a suit would celebrate such a total failure. Tears welled in his eyes as the weight of his repetitive cycle finally crashed down on him. He realized then that this pattern of starting and failing, of being useful but never essential, had been the defining characteristic of his entire existence since the very beginning. His life had been a montage of temporary roles, from hauling materials on construction sites to balancing trays in crowded restaurants and staring blankly at office monitors. In every instance, he was treated as a disposable tool, used for his broad but shallow skills, and discarded the moment his immediate utility vanished. The advice from his many superiors had always been the same: find a specialty, focus on one path, and develop the patience to succeed. Their stern faces and pointing fingers serve as a constant reminder that, in their eyes, his versatility was nothing more than a lack of direction, a fundamental flaw that would prevent him from ever becoming someone of importance. Standing alone, he accepted the label that had been thrust upon him by society. He was the ultimate generalist, a man defined not by what he could do, but by the fact that he could do a little of everything and yet belong nowhere, forever branded as a jack-of-all-trades. He stood there, face flushed with a mixture of shame and exhaustion, muttering to himself about the cycle of unemployment. It wasn't as if he enjoyed jumping from job to job, but the reality of his situation left him with no choice but to start the hunt for a new position immediately. As he walked down the street, lost in his own dejection, he reminded himself that there was no time to mope. Just as he resolved to find his next workplace, a sudden, sharp realization cut through his internal monologue, causing his eyes to widen in shock. A truck roared toward a mother and child crossing the street, oblivious to the impending danger. Without a second thought, he lunged forward, screaming a desperate warning as he threw himself into the path of the vehicle to push them out of harm's way. The sickening sound of impact echoed through the air as blood sprayed violently across the pavement. In the sudden void of consciousness, a cold, mechanical voice announced a global notification to all living beings, declaring that a fundamental modification of the world's system was now underway. Above the city, a massive, digital vortex tore through the sky, sparking panic as the voice continued its broadcast, explaining that it was now constructing individual statuses based on personal data. His hand lay motionless on the cold ground as the voice resonated directly within his mind, announcing that it was performing a compatibility check for unique skill. With his vision fading and his face battered, he listened as the system concluded that no unique skill existed that matched his specific thought patterns, a revelation he accepted with a final, bitter sense of resignation. He lies broken on the cold pavement, the world around him dissolving into a blur of panicked voices and rushing feet. In his final moments of consciousness, a bitter thought takes root. He was never destined to be anyone special, just another face in the crowd. As the light fades, that sense of insignificance becomes an absolute truth. He drifts into a void where the concept of self begins to unravel, leaving behind only the cold certainty that he could never become the hero he once dreamed of being. Deep within the digital architecture of the shifting world, a new directive is issued. Since no existing template fits, the system initiates the creation of a bespoke power. A notification pulses through the ether. The unique skill, all-knowing manifestation, has been successfully forged and bestowed upon the dying soul. Moments later, or perhaps lifetimes, he opens his eyes to the sterile white of a hospital room. A physician stands at his bedside, reviewing a clipboard and noting that his physical recovery is nothing short of miraculous. The man in the white coat speaks softly, explaining that he needs to ask a few questions to ensure his cognitive functions are intact. He sits up, testing the strength in his fingers and finding his body responsive and healthy. He answers the initial questions with ease, confirming his nationality and other basic facts. However, the atmosphere shifts when the doctor asks him to state his name for the record. The question hits him like a physical blow, leaving him stunned and breathless. He repeats the word name as if it were a foreign concept, his eyes widening in sudden, sharp terror. A void has opened where his identity should be, and he realizes with a jolt of panic that he has no idea who he is. The doctor observes the sudden shift in his patient's demeanor, noting the way the young man's hands begin to tremble. He clutches his head, his voice cracking as he confesses the impossible. He remembers the world and his life, but his own name has been erased from his mind. He pleads with the doctor, insisting that he can see his parents' faces and recall every detail of his past, yet that one vital piece of information remains out of reach. The physician remains composed, adjusting his glasses and suggesting that in this new, system-driven reality, such strange occurrences might become the new normal. He stares blankly as the doctor explains the gravity of the situation. Since the day of his accident, the world has undergone a complete transformation during the 6 months he spent unconscious. According to the physician, on that fateful day, every human on Earth heard a mysterious voice echoing directly inside their minds. Immediately following that event, something called a status appeared for all of humanity. People's physical and mental capabilities were quantified, with levels fluctuating wildly. Some gained specialized jobs and awakened unique skills based on their life experiences. Furthermore, a darker change took hold. Grotesque creatures, now known as monsters, began appearing across the globe. While humanity struggled to respond to this unknown threat, some individuals who suddenly gained supernatural powers began fighting amongst themselves. Back in the quiet of the hospital room, the young man listens, realizing that while the world changed, something even more bizarre happened specifically to him. He sifts through his personal belongings, a driver's license and various certificates, only to find a chilling void where his name should be. Every single record of his identity has been completely erased, leaving him unable to even explain his situation to the police or local authorities. Using a fake name at a government office would only lead to more trouble with the law. As he contemplates his nameless existence, a translucent screen flickers into view before him. It displays his lack of basic stats, but highlights a single peculiar entry, a unique skill titled Jack of all trades. A cold, internal realization settles over him, a voice from the void declaring that he can never truly become anyone. He stands alone under a vast, open sky, clutching the blank document that should have held his identity. The weight of his situation settles in. Having lost even his name, he wonders if he has truly become the nobody the mysterious voice proclaimed. His eyes widen as a spark of defiance flickers within him. Despite the erasure of his past, a singular, driving desire takes hold. He wants to know the truth behind this transformation. The reality of his current state is grim, and he mentally tallies his losses. No fixed address, no job, and no name. He realizes that even if he returned to his old apartment, he would be nothing more than a suspicious stranger in a world that no longer recognizes his existence. As he ponders his next move, an older man in a worn cap and heavy coat looks away, his voice carrying a weary wisdom. He remarks that for those who have fallen through the cracks of society, a name is a luxury that holds little meaning. His words strike a chord, and the young man suddenly remembers a place where he might find temporary refuge. A look of recognition crosses his face as the memory of a specific location surfaces. His feet lead him toward the entrance of Ryakuka Park, a public space that has clearly taken on a new purpose in this systemic world. Beyond the tree line, a cluster of makeshift tents stands in a quiet clearing. This hidden community offers a stark contrast to the rigid, status-driven society outside, serving as a sanctuary for those the system has discarded. He quickly integrates into the camp's rhythm, carrying a heavy crate as he navigates between the residents. Nearby, people gather around a makeshift stove for a warm meal and huddle close to a burning barrel, finding a sense of belonging among fellow outcasts. He is greeted by the elderly man, who approaches with 2 steaming bowls of food, addressing him simply as the nameless boy. Taking the offered meal, he expresses his gratitude to Ike-san, the warmth of the bowl a welcome comfort against the chill. As they sit together outside the makeshift shelter, the older man admits he had feared the worst, thinking the boy had vanished from the world entirely during his 6-month absence. He chuckles in response, assuring his companion that he is actually doing quite well despite appearances. While they eat, the conversation turns to the community within the park, where many others have found a similar refuge. The elder notes that while none of them know his true name, it is of no consequence in a place like this. He reflects on his history with these men, recalling how they had accepted him long before he lost his identity. Even when he would appear out of nowhere, they always welcomed him with open arms and shared what little they had, like a bottle of spirits among friends. Despite the shared struggle of their unstable lives, he recognizes a fundamental distinction between himself and the others. Watching them work and live for the sake of tomorrow, he feels a profound sense of displacement, realizing his own path is diverging from theirs. His internal monologue is interrupted when the old man asks the nameless boy for a small favor, requesting that he head out to collect aluminum cans since their supply has dwindled. He hands over the directions, his weathered face set in a serious expression as he reminds the young man that even in this fractured world, currency remains a necessity for survival. Kiyoshi accepts the task, asking for the specific location of the collection point. Waving a casual goodbye, the young man sets off, his mind already turning to the harsh reality of his finances. He knows he cannot continue to lean on the kindness of the park's residents. To maintain even a basic existence, he must secure his own funds. The elder watches the retreating figure in silence, his hand raised in a slow, contemplative wave as the distance between them grows. The path leads to the outskirts, where the skeletal remains of an industrial complex loom against the sky, its chimneys cold and silent. Stepping into the shadows of a derelict warehouse, he notes the unsettling stillness of the area, the air thick with dust and the smell of decay. A sudden, sharp sound shatters the quiet, causing him to spin around in alarm, his eyes widening as he realizes he is no longer alone. From the darkness, a sinister figure emerges, mocking the boy's choice of location. The stranger explains that this isolated district, recently overrun by strange creatures, is the perfect site for illicit dealings far from prying eyes. With a cruel laugh, the man reveals his trap as a pack of snarling, gray-skinned monsters closes in. He sneers that a naive fool like Kiyoshi is nothing more than prime fodder for the beasts. He lets out a sadistic cackle, his eyes gleaming with malice as he commands the pack of gray-skinned monsters to feast upon their prey. Beside him, the young man in the suit recoils in sheer disbelief, his breath hitching as he finally recognizes the twisted, inhuman nature of the creatures surrounding him. As the command echoes through the warehouse, the goblins lunge from the shadows with feral screeches, their jagged blades and claws ready to strike. Realizing he is utterly powerless against such a coordinated assault, the young adventurer turns to flee, his heart hammering against his ribs as a desperate, life-or-death struggle for survival begins. A hand sets a small, metallic object down upon a stone near a makeshift shelter, a quiet offering in the wilderness. The elderly man, Ike-san, gazes downward with a heavy heart, whispering a somber apology to the boy who is no longer there. Beneath his feet, the soil is disturbed where hands once clawed desperately at the earth, a grim reminder of a struggle that ended in regret. He recalls the terror of the ambush, the monsters, and the mocking, shadowed grin of the man who led them. Yet, amidst that darkness, he remembers the young adventurer's radiant smile and his words of validation, claiming that those who struggle to live as they do are the most authentic of humans. Reflecting on their meeting, the old man sits by the warmth of a burning barrel while the youth stands tall beside him. He muses to himself that the boy was certainly an eccentric soul, unlike anyone he had ever met in the camps. The young man had approached him earlier at a soup kitchen, asking with a friendly tilt of his head if the elder recalled their previous encounter among the crowds of refugees. Standing under the shelter of an umbrella during a downpour, he had playfully addressed the elder as a sage, expressing a genuine and humble desire to hear the stories of the man's long life. He continued, noting that his own experience working a vast array of odd jobs allowed him to recognize the calloused, skilled hands of a true craftsman in the old man. With a look of pure admiration, he confessed his deep respect for those who have devoted their entire lives to mastering a single path, finding dignity in their unwavering dedication. He was a soul unlike any other, a truth that caused the old man's eyes to well with tears as he dwelled on the past. The young man had possessed a genuine admiration for those the world had cast aside, never once looking down on their weathered hands or broken lives. Because of this bond, they had spent hours walking and talking, the boy's curiosity about the old man's former life as a craftsman never wavering. His laughter had been a bright, defiant sound against the gloom of their surroundings, his face lighting up with every story shared. Now, that vibrant spirit was gone, leaving the craftsman to kneel in the dirt and place a small cup of sake as a final tribute before a simple stone marker. The old man stood and turned away, his expression hardening into one of grim purpose as he left the lonely grave behind. He moved toward the horizon without looking back, leaving the small stone to stand watch over the memories of the boy who had seen his work. Far beyond the quiet field, the massive, smoke-belching chimneys of an industrial complex dominated the skyline, marking the next stage of his journey. The young man sprints through the corridor, his breath coming in ragged gasps as the gray-skinned creatures snap at his heels. Panic flares in his eyes. He knows that if he doesn't keep moving, they will tear him apart. Behind him, the architect of this ambush lets out a mocking laugh, commanding the monsters to feast on their prey. The realization of the betrayal hits the runner like a physical blow, his shock momentarily overriding his fear as he looks back at the man who led him into this trap. As he continues his desperate flight, strange, glowing symbols manifest in his vision, announcing that he has unlocked the fugitive class along with several survival skills like flat surface running and pathfinding. He can hardly believe the timing of this sudden awakening, his mind racing to process the new information while his legs carry him forward. He finds the situation worsening as more of the leathery creatures emerge from the shadows ahead, effectively cutting off his path. He feels the walls closing in, wondering if this cold, dark place is where his journey finally ends. Doubled over and gasping for air, he finally understands the depth of the deception. He was never meant to be a partner, only bait to keep the monsters occupied. The indignity of being treated as nothing more than fodder burns hotter than the exhaustion in his lungs, fueling a spark of resentment. A guttural roar of defiance erupts from his throat, a rejection of the fate chosen for him by another. He refuses to be a victim, his voice echoing through the narrow passage as he shouts his refusal to be toyed with. He forces his trembling hands to curl into tight fists, his gaze hardening as the monsters draw their rusted blades. If he wants to see another dawn, he must stop running and find the strength to stand his ground. With a newfound fire in his eyes, he stares down the approaching pack, his resolve finally crystallizing. He commands himself to make a choice, to face the nightmare head-on and fight for his life. He lets out a guttural roar as the gray-skinned monsters close in from all sides. The desperation of the moment reaches a fever pitch, his voice echoing through the dark corridor as he prepares for the inevitable clash. Suddenly, a shimmering notification manifests in the air before him, announcing that he has acquired the basic class of mentalist. This unexpected development ripples through the chaos, momentarily halting the flow of time. Because of this new awakening, his perception shifts drastically. He watches in disbelief as the lunging goblin's movements slow to a crawl, while further notifications confirm he has gained insight eye, mind reading, and mental resistance at level 1. With this newfound clarity, he focuses on the ground near the creature's feet. He realizes that a well-placed distraction could be the key to his survival in this lopsided fight. He springs into action, leaping high over the lead monster with a burst of agility that leaves the thug leader watching from the shadows in stunned silence. The air whistles past him as he clears the threat, his movements now precise and calculated. Upon landing, he continues his momentum, weaving through the confused pack of monsters. They snap their jaws at the empty air where he stood only a heartbeat before, unable to track his sudden increase in speed. In the heat of the struggle, a sharp metallic sound rings out. The instinct to survive takes over, driving him to target the most vulnerable parts of his attackers. He finds himself locked in a brutal struggle, gripping a jagged weapon and pressing it against the goblin's throat. Even as he fights with a ferocity he didn't know he possessed, a part of him wonders why he is suddenly capable of such violence. He watches the goblin's movements with a newfound clarity, reading the trajectory of the club's swing before it even begins. He realizes that by observing the enemy's initial stance, he can predict the pattern of their attack, identifying the coming blow as a simple horizontal swipe. Because of this foresight, his body reacts with a fluid grace that surprises even himself, leaping high over the beast's head. As he descends, he delivers a sharp, calculated strike that sends the monster reeling, his movements perfectly synchronized with his heightened senses. The blow connects with a sickening thud, and he quickly assesses the remaining threats, noting that only 2 of the creatures are left standing. He doesn't hesitate, pressing his advantage as the goblins struggle to keep up with his speed, their once terrifying presence now reduced to mere obstacles. While he sprints through the shadows, he notes that his physical response is now perfectly in sync with his heightened perception. He realizes that unlike his previous frantic struggles, he is now moving with a calculated purpose that feels entirely alien, yet strangely natural. He leads the remaining monsters deeper into the narrow corridors, taunting them by calling this their familiar hunting ground. The sound of their frantic footsteps echoes against the damp walls as they pursue him, unaware they are being lured into a space where their numbers will be a disadvantage. As the chaos unfolds, his attention shifts to the verticality of the alley, deciding that this is the perfect moment to lure them into his trap. He uses the cramped walls to propel himself upward, looking down at the confused creatures as he prepares to strike from above. In response, he drops back down with lethal precision, pinning one of the creatures to the ground with a heavy boot. The goblin shrieks in pain as its companion watches in terror, the power dynamic of the hunt completely reversed in a matter of seconds. The warrior raises his arm for the final strike, his eyes burning with a grim determination as he declares that this is the end for them. Nearby, the thug leader watches the display with wide-eyed disbelief, his arrogant smirk replaced by a mask of pure shock as he utters a gasp of realization. He stands amidst the carnage, his chest heaving as the adrenaline begins to ebb. The bodies of the goblin pack lie scattered at his feet, silent and broken. In the air before him, ethereal glyphs shimmer into existence, announcing the total annihilation of the threat and the massive influx of experience. His growth is explosive, his rank surging from a mere novice at level 1 to a seasoned level 7 in a single, bloody encounter. Still catching his breath, the young man stares at the fading corpses, a look of disbelief crossing his face as he questions if the victory is truly his. The shimmering interface continues its report, granting him a special subjugation bonus and noting a significant increase in his skill proficiency. He leans against a nearby wall, the weight of the struggle finally catching up to him. As he recovers, a new notification catches his eye, prompting him to wonder if his constant tactical analysis during the heat of battle triggered this unexpected development. He reaches out toward the glowing display, his mind racing to understand the mechanics of this world that seems to reward his every calculated move. The interface expands, revealing his evolving status. Beneath his roles as a fugitive and a mentalist, a new title has manifested, the Appraiser. Along with this new class, he has gained the Connoisseur skill at level 1, a testament to his growing ability to perceive the hidden truths of the world around him. A sudden, violent strike tears through the air, catching a gray-skinned creature off guard as dark fluid sprays from its neck. Witnessing the sudden carnage, the spiky-haired man stands frozen, his arrogance replaced by a stammering confusion as he tries to process the shift in the battle. Before he can find an answer, another of the small monsters is cut down with a sickening crunch, its screech cut short by the sheer force of the impact. The man's eyes widen in genuine fear, sweat beading on his brow, as he questions who this newcomer could possibly be and why such power is being unleashed. Nearby, another goblin collapses with a guttural cry, its leathery body hitting the ground as the whirlwind of violence continues unabated. The source of the devastation is the young man in the business suit, who moves with a lethal, practiced grace that defies his mundane appearance, swinging one creature like a club into another. The thug leader can only watch in disbelief, marveling at the impossible speed and strength on display. High above the blood-soaked clearing, a lone bird circles the jagged cliffs of the canyon, a silent witness to the sudden and brutal turn of events. Below, the silence returns to the forest floor, punctuated only by the sight of the fallen monsters, their threat neutralized as quickly as it had begun. They lay scattered and broken, the immediate threat of the pack extinguished as the young man in the suit catches his breath. He reflects on the narrow escape, his gaze shifting toward the figure standing in the shadows, the one who clearly commands these creatures and must be dealt with next. Focusing his intent, he activates his appraisal skill, his eye glowing with a sharp, analytical light as he attempts to discern the true nature of his remaining opponent. The skill pulses outward, ripples of energy expanding from the man in the distance as the appraisal begins to take hold of his form. Data begins to manifest in the air, revealing the stranger to be a level 5 human with the class of Monster Tamer, though many of his specific attributes remain obscure by mystery. He finds a lack of detailed information frustrating, noting that at level 1, the display is far from comprehensive. Despite the gaps, he processes what he has learned. The man relies on commanding monsters because he likely lacks significant combat prowess of his own, a realization that shifts the tactical landscape. Comparing their stats, he confirms his own advantage at level 7, realizing that in a direct confrontation, the odds lean heavily in his favor. With renewed confidence, he tightens his grip on his weapon, ready to press the attack now that the master of the beast stands exposed. He confidently states that his level is higher, a fact that catches the thug off guard. The man in the necklaces demands to know how he could possibly know such a thing, his arrogance momentarily replaced by confusion. The realization hits the thug like a physical blow. He identifies the boy as an appraiser. A slow, calculating grin spreads across his face as he mutters to himself, processing the immense value of such a rare ability. He steps down from the wooden crates, his boots thudding against the floor. Across from him, the young man tightens his grip on the metal bat, his eyes never leaving his opponent. The thug walks forward with a relaxed gait that belies the tension in the air. Every step he takes causes the adventurer to shift his weight, ready for a sudden strike. Instead of attacking, he stops and extends an open hand, proposing an unexpected alliance. The suggestion leaves the boy stunned, his mouth agape as he tries to reconcile the offer with the previous hostility. He settles onto a nearby ledge, explaining that in this transformed world, a skill like appraisal is incredibly rare. He admits he had only heard rumors of such abilities until this very moment and recognizes the strategic advantage it provides. The man continues his pitch, noting how advantageous it is to gauge an opponent's strength before conflict even begins. He chuckles, asking if the boy intended to strike him down simply because the numbers suggested an easy victory. He reveals that his own profession is a rare variant, and with the boy's eyes to guide him, his own growth would become far more efficient. He promises a fair share of the rewards if they work together, leaving the adventurer to weigh the morality of the offer against the logic of survival. He leans back on a crate, extending a hand in a mock gesture of friendship. He argues that in a world where people are inherently untrustworthy, the only logical path is for them to join forces and exploit the system together. The young adventurer listens in silence, his sharp eyes narrowing as he processes the cynical proposal. He admits that the man's words hold a certain cold logic, acknowledging that in this harsh reality, self-interest often dictates survival. Taking a firm step forward, the sound of his boot hitting the floor echoes in the quiet space. He stands his ground before the seated thug, the tension between them thick enough to touch. Gripping his wooden club tightly, he clarifies that while that logic might govern the thug's world, it has no place in his own. He refuses to abandon his principles for the sake of easy gains. With a gaze full of unwavering resolve, he delivers a final, blunt rejection of the offer, making it clear that their paths will never align. Left alone in the dim light, the thug can only watch as his potential partner turns away, the silence returning to the alley. He sits in heavy silence for a long moment, the weight of the rejection hanging in the air like a physical shroud. A dark, predatory grin spreads across his face as he coldly delivers a death sentence, telling his former prospect that if he won't cooperate, he should simply die. Without him even moving from his seat, a trio of gray-skinned monsters lunges from the shadows behind him, their screeching cries filling the cramped space. The sudden ambush catches the young adventurer completely off guard, his eyes widening in sheer disbelief at the immediate and lethal treachery. He barely has time to raise his weapon before the pack is upon him, their jagged claws and primitive blades closing in from all sides. Watching the struggle with sadistic glee, the man mocks his victim, laughing at the idea that the boy thought the danger had passed and telling him to accept his fate as monster bait. One of the creatures swings a heavy club with savage force, forcing the boy to scramble backward, narrowly avoiding a blow that would have shattered his ribs. He struggles to catch his breath, realizing that while the monster's movements are simple and predictable, his own exhaustion from the previous battles is starting to take a heavy toll on his reaction time. He strains against the overwhelming pressure, his eyes wide with terror as a gray, clawed hand lunges toward his face. The desperation of the struggle is etched into every line of his face as he barely manages to keep the monster at bay. Watching from a safe distance, the ambush architect clicks his tongue in irritation, noting that despite having fed these creatures the experience of 10 men, they are still struggling to finish the job. He grows increasingly impatient with the slow progress of the slaughter. As the battle rages on behind him, the leader realizes that the boy is far more resilient than he anticipated, and he cannot afford to let such a threat continue to develop. He prepares himself to intervene if the goblins fail to deliver the killing blow. With a guttural roar of defiance, the exhausted warrior puts every ounce of his remaining strength into a desperate swing, hoping to clear a path through the encroaching horde. A sickening crack echoes through the air as the blow connects with a heavy, dull impact. The sound causes him to freeze, his pupils dilating in sudden, sharp realization as the vibration travels up his arm. His makeshift weapon, unable to withstand the constant strain of the combat, shatters into useless splinters against the goblin's tough hide. He stands momentarily defenseless, staring at the broken remains in his hand. Panic surges through him as he frantically searches for any other means of defense, his mind racing to find a solution before the monsters capitalize on his vulnerability. He realizes with a sinking heart that the durability of his gear has finally failed him at the worst possible moment. He stands frozen as a snarling goblin lunges through the air, its claws outstretched for the kill. The young man's eyes widen in terror as the realization of his impending demise flashes before him, the very concept of death looming large in his mind. Suddenly, a sharp cry pierces the air, calling out to him just as a blinding flash of movement disrupts the fatal trajectory. A heavy metal pipe swings with crushing force, catching the monster mid-leap and sending it reeling back with a pained shriek. Stunned by the sudden intervention, he watches as a sturdy figure steps into the fray, the heavy weapon still vibrating from the impact. The elderly refugee looks down with a grim, focused expression, noting that the rescue came just in the nick of time. Standing tall despite his age, the old man grips his makeshift club with both hands, forming a solid wall between the boy and the remaining threats. The elderly man stood firm, his presence a sudden shield for the younger adventurer. Kiyoshi, still catching his breath on the ground, looked up in disbelief at Ike-san, who remarked on how narrow the escape had been. The boy offered a hurried apology for the trouble he'd caused, his voice trembling with relief. As he looked at his savior, a familiar interface flickered before his eyes, revealing the harsh reality of the old man's strength. The appraisal skill laid it bare, with only an old iron pipe for a weapon and combat stats that were practically non-existent. The elder was no warrior. He watched as the elder turned his gaze away, his expression heavy with a mix of regret and determination. The old man urged the boy to find cover, insisting that the situation was far too perilous for him to remain in the open, his voice dropping to a somber apology. However, the toll of the old man's sudden intervention became painfully clear as he winced, clutching his lower back in agony. He admitted that the strain of rushing to the rescue and shielding the youth had finally caught up with him, leaving him rooted to the spot and unable to move another inch. Before they could react to this new setback, a shadow fell over them as the architect of the ambush stepped forward, his face twisted in a sneer. He spat out insults, labeling them as useless trash and cursing the failure of his goblin subordinates. He erupted into a full-blown tirade, his voice rising to a manic screech as he demanded to know why they were still breathing. His arrogance was palpable as he mocked their ignorance and directed his venom specifically at the young appraiser. With a dismissive gesture, the man declared that he would simply have to start over and retrain his pack of monsters from scratch. He then turned his cold, predatory attention toward the trembling elder, addressing him with utter contempt. His eyes gleamed with a sadistic light as he leaned in, a jagged grin spreading across his face. He mused aloud that the nearby park would serve as a perfect feeding ground for his creatures, leaving the old man paralyzed with a cold, creeping dread. He bellows a command, his voice dripping with malice as he vows that no one will escape. While Kiyoshi tries to process the sudden shift in the conversation, the leader roars for his orc to emerge. From the darkness behind the bars, a single, glowing eye snaps open. With a deafening crash, the metal bars are torn asunder by an immense force. Reacting instantly to the danger, the young man shouts for Ike-san to stay back, positioning himself between the elder and the emerging threat. They are both hurled backward as the ground trembles under the weight of the beast's arrival. A cry of shock escapes the boy's lips as he loses his footing, the sheer pressure of the monster's presence knocking them both to the dirt. A colossal, gray-skinned foot slams into the pavement, cracking the concrete like glass. Scrambling to his feet and realizing the scale of the adversary, the boy focuses his gaze, activating his appraisal skill to gauge the monster's strength. The creature stands revealed as a massive orc, its hulking frame wreathed in a dark, smoky aura. The floating interface confirms his fears. It is a level 14 beast, far beyond anything they have faced, and its current state is marked as one of pure, unbridled rage. He stares in disbelief, his pupils contracting as he processes the data. The realization that their opponent is not only high-level but also possesses hidden status effects sends a chill down his spine, leaving him momentarily paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of the situation. While the boy reels from the discovery, the architect of this nightmare steps forward. He looks on with a twisted sense of pride, seemingly unfazed by the destructive power he has unleashed upon the park. He laughs mockingly, calling them fools and pointing out that even if they could somehow best him, they stand no chance against his pet. With a final, sharp command, he orders the orc to finish them, and the beast responds with a bone-chilling roar that echoes through the night. He recoils in sheer disbelief as the very beast he summoned turns its primal fury upon him. The orc's massive arm swings with crushing force, catching its master completely off guard and sending him flying. The impact sends a shockwave through the alley, kicking up a cloud of debris and dust as the leader is slammed into the stone. Watching from a distance, the young adventurer gasps, his eyes wide with a sudden, violent shift in the battle's tide. Seeing the opening, the old man cries out to the boy, urging him to stay alert and seize the moment. Meanwhile, the fallen leader slumps against the cold stone wall, blood trickling down his face as the realization hits him like a physical blow. He has lost control of his own monster. The massive, gray-skinned monster doesn't stop there, turning its attention back to the boy and looming over him like a mountain of muscle. Its shadow engulfs him as a colossal fist begins its descent, threatening to crush him into the pavement. Instead of fleeing, he narrows his eyes, his fear replaced by a sharp, cold focus. He calculates the trajectory of the incoming blow, his body tensing like a coiled spring as he prepares to move at the absolute last second. With a sudden burst of speed, he leaps aside just as the orc's fist shatters the ground where he stood. The force of the strike sends cracks spiderwebbing through the pavement, but the boy is already moving, his reflexes sharpened by desperation. The beast lets out a frustrated roar, its massive frame trembling with rage as it searches for its elusive prey. From his vantage point, the elder watches with bated breath, a flicker of hope returning to his tired eyes as he sees the boy survive the impossible. He continues his desperate dance, vaulting over obstacles and staying just out of reach of the orc's grasping hands. Every movement is a gamble, a frantic struggle to survive against an enemy that could end him with a single touch. Yet he refuses to back down. He recoils as the orc's deafening roar shakes the very air, the beast's massive form looming like a shadow of death. Retreating to the cover of a nearby wall, he gasps for breath, his mind racing with the realization that he cannot outrun the monster while protecting the elderly man, nor can he hope to defeat it with his bare hands. As he laments his lack of a weapon, his gaze falls upon the old man, who silently reaches out and grasps a discarded metal pipe from the debris. The elder grips the cold iron with surprising strength, a look of grim determination replacing his previous exhaustion. He then turns to the young adventurer, asking if he can buy just a few moments of time while he uses the pipe to forge a proper blade. A shimmering status window suddenly manifests, revealing the old man's true profession as a blacksmith. He notes that the boy seems able to perceive this hidden information. Watching the elder prepare, he struggles to understand why a man with a non-combat profession would engage in such a reckless gamble. Yet he recognizes the necessity of the act. Though he is grateful for the offer of a weapon, his concern grows as a new notification appears, warning that the activation of this unique skill will require a significant cost. He is snapped back to reality by the old man's furious shout, as Ike-san bellows that there is no time for hesitation when their companions in the park are still in grave danger. He looks on in stunned silence, the weight of the responsibility settling heavily upon his shoulders as the gravity of the situation finally sinks in. His thoughts drift to the faces of the refugees they left behind, a fleeting image of the people who are counting on his success to survive this nightmare. He quickly shakes off the memory, his gaze sharpening with a newfound sense of purpose and a cold, focused resolve to protect them all. He digs his heels into the ground, pivoting with sudden, explosive energy as he prepares to launch himself into the fray. He leaps into the air, calling out a final word of encouragement to the blacksmith, telling Ike-san that he's counting on him to finish the job while he buys them time. He charges across the broken terrain, narrowing the gap between himself and a massive, waiting orc with reckless speed. He bellows a challenge at the beast, warning it not to look down on his fugitive profession while he successfully draws its full, murderous attention toward himself. While he continues to draw the beast's fury, the elderly refugee turns his attention to a flickering interface hovering before him. A dire warning flashes across the display, cautioning that the activation of his skill requires a heavy price. Yet he does not hesitate to proceed with the activation. Steeling his resolve, the old man acknowledges that the path forward is set, regardless of the cost to himself. His eyes, once tired, now burn with a final, desperate purpose as he accepts the consequences of his choice. Suddenly, a sharp, agonizing pang strikes his chest, causing him to gasp and clutch at his heart. The toll for the forbidden technique begins to manifest physically, racking his aged frame with tremors as the energy is drawn from within. Despite the pain, he raises a spectral hammer that glows with an ethereal white light. The title of blacksmith manifests in the air, signaling the start of craft that transcends mere metalwork and enters the realm of the soul. While the elder prepares his craft, the young adventurer is thrown back by the sheer force of the orc's presence, struggling to maintain his footing. Seeing the boy's struggle, the elder shouts for him to prepare himself to receive the fruit of this unique skill, urging him to hold on just a moment longer. With a final, resounding strike of the glowing hammer, the old man pours his very essence into the work. He views this act not just as a necessity for survival, but as a long-overdue atonement for the shadows of his past. Bathed in a blinding radiance, he holds aloft a shimmering blade of soul steel, a material forged from his own life force. Declaring it his final repayment of a debt, he sacrifices his physical well-being to complete the ultimate skill activation, offering the weapon to the boy. The massive beast lets out a deafening roar, its heavy footsteps shaking the very ground as it pursues its prey with relentless fury. Desperate to survive, the young man in the suit sprints away, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he frantically looks back, wondering if his elderly companion has managed to stay safe amidst the chaos. He pushes his body to its absolute limit, and amidst the frantic escape, a series of mental notifications inform him that his proficiency in movement and mental fortitude has reached new heights. Despite the growth, he realizes that his sustained sprint has left him drained, and he silently pleads for more power to survive, all while catching a glimpse of the old man preparing to forge a new path for them. He is nearly thrown off balance as the ground erupts in a cloud of dust and debris, the monster's massive fist slamming down just inches from where he stood a second before. He cries out in shock, his heart hammering against his ribs as he barely avoids being crushed by the brute's overwhelming and sudden display of power. He continues his desperate dance with death, leaping over rubble as the creature's relentless assault tears up the environment behind him. Every muscle in his body screams in protest, and he curses his own weakness, knowing that he cannot keep this pace up forever while the monster remains so close on his heels. He notices a terrifying change in his pursuer. The beast's movements are becoming even more frequent and violent, showing no signs of the fatigue that is currently weighing him down. A chilling realization strikes him that the monster has likely entered a state of pure, unbridled rage, making it far more dangerous than he initially anticipated. He finds himself cornered as the situation grows dire, the shadow of the behemoth looming over him with its jagged teeth bared in a predatory snarl. He feels the walls closing in, his mind racing through every possible escape route, while he silently pleads for a miracle to intervene before his luck finally runs out. He feels a flicker of hope as a familiar voice cuts through the chaos, calling out for him to catch a gift from the shadows. He turns, his eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and burgeoning relief as he sees the old man ready to provide the edge he so desperately needs to survive this encounter. He watches in stunned silence as a heavy object hurtles through the air with a thunderous impact, landing with enough force to shake the earth once more. He stares in awe at the sudden arrival, his mind reeling as he prepares to seize this final chance at survival and turn the tide against the beast. He stared down at the massive blade embedded in the earth, his breath hitching in surprise. It was a formidable weapon, far more substantial and lethal than anything he had ever hoped to wield in this desperate struggle. Reaching out, he gripped the wrapped hilt, noting the weight and balance as he realized this was no mere tool, but a finely crafted short sword designed for true combat. As he hoisted the weapon, he marveled at its incredible quality, shouting his thanks to Ike-san for the timely intervention. The weight felt right in his hands, and a surge of confidence replaced his fear. He knew that with a blade like this, he actually stood a chance of winning against the roaring beast. Though he had never handled a real sword before, he quickly analyzed the situation, concluding that it was essentially just a long, sharp object. He focused on the fundamentals, telling himself that as long as he swung straight and kept the edge aligned, the weapon's weight would do the rest of the work as he prepared to strike. With a desperate swing, he felt the steel bite deep into the monster's flesh, a spray of dark blood confirming that the weapon had easily bypassed the creature's thick hide. He was almost shocked by how smoothly the blade cut through, realizing that his gamble had paid off. The beast let out a deafening howl of agony, but he didn't hesitate, pivoting away from a clumsy counterattack while keeping his grip firm on the heavy hilt. He moved with a newfound agility, the sword feeling like an extension of his own arm. He pressed the advantage, his movements a blur as he delivered a rapid succession of precise cuts, systematically dismantling the giant's defenses and carving through its massive limbs. Finally, the massive creature's legs gave way, its own immense weight becoming its downfall as it crashed into the dirt. He watched as the beast collapsed, noting that its giant frame simply couldn't support itself once its mobility had been stripped away. He stands panting, his breath hitching as he observes the massive creature before him. It is clear the beast's legs have reached their breaking point, unable to support its own weight any longer. Gripping the hilt of the short sword, he watches as the monster lets out a guttural roar of frustration. He realizes that this creature, much like the goblins before it, is merely a pawn being manipulated by a distant monster tamer. His gaze sharpens, focusing entirely on the task at hand. With a grim determination, he whispers a promise to end the beast's suffering immediately. With a sudden, explosive burst of speed, he lunges forward, his boots kicking up dust as he closes the distance. He leaps into the air, raising the blade high above his head for a final, crushing blow. Every ounce of his remaining strength is poured into this single, decisive strike, aimed at ending the encounter once and for all. As the blade descends, a strange sensation washes over him, and a mental notification confirms he has unlocked the basic profession of a dismantler. The strike connects with devastating precision, carving through the monster's hide as additional insights into combat flood his mind. He feels himself growing stronger, gaining instincts for finding weak points and increasing the efficiency of his strikes. Standing over the fallen foe, he exhales slowly, his expression hardening as he declares the battle finished. He strikes with surgical precision, his blade carving through the thick, leathery hide of the beast's neck. With a focused glare, the young man follows through on the swing, his suit jacket fluttering as he pours every ounce of his remaining strength into the finishing move. The momentum carries him past the monster as its head is cleanly severed from its shoulders, a spray of dark blood marking the definitive end of the struggle. As the heavy head thuds onto the dirt, he stands with his back to the carnage, his chest heaving as he desperately tries to catch his breath. He is drenched in sweat, his eyes wide with the lingering adrenaline of the kill, the reality of his hard-won victory finally beginning to sink in. Behind him, the massive, headless torso of the orc finally loses its balance and crashes to the earth with a deafening final weight. Turning to face the fallen giant, he stares in disbelief at the scale of the creature he just brought down, a single word of relief escaping his lips as the tension leaves his body. Suddenly, shimmering windows of light manifest before him, announcing a massive influx of experience. He marvels at the fact that he jumped from level 7 to 12 in an instant, realizing that the greater the foe, the greater the reward. He looks down at the blade in his hand, the metal gleaming with a lethal edge. Without this weapon, the encounter would have surely ended in his demise. Even as an amateur, he can feel the incredible power surging through the steel. Suddenly, his thoughts snap back to the elderly man he was trying to protect. He calls out for Ike-san, realizing that despite his own victory, the situation remains dire. As he stands over the massive, unmoving form of the beast, a low groan echoes through the clearing. His gaze shifts, searching for the source of the sound amidst the settling dust. To his shock, the man who orchestrated this ambush is still standing, clutching a vial of rare recovery medicine. The thug leader snarls in frustration, cursing the boy for forcing him to use such a valuable item just to stay alive. The villain stares at the decapitated orc, his voice cracking with disbelief as he demands to know how a mere novice could have slain such a monster. Standing firm over his kill, the young adventurer simply gestures to the carnage, the reality of the situation speaking for itself. Realizing the tide has turned, the thug leader turns on his heel and begins to flee into the woods, his laughter ringing out with a chilling edge. He shouts back a warning that this area will soon be crawling with even more monsters, leaving the victor behind. With a final, cruel taunt, the fleeing man mocks the adventurer's concern for the fallen elder, suggesting that the old man's corpse will soon become nothing more than a meal for the scavengers. The young man's eyes widen in horror as the weight of those words sinks in. In that moment of emotional turmoil, a cold, mechanical notification manifests in the air, signaling that a hidden price for his sudden growth has been triggered. He curses under his breath, his face contorted with frustration as he watches his enemy flee into the distance. The escape of the thug leader is a bitter pill to swallow, leaving him alone with the weight of the situation and the urgent need to find his companion. Turning away from the retreating figure, the young adventurer sprints through the desolate alleyways, his voice echoing off the cold concrete as he desperately calls out for Ike-san. Every second feels like an eternity as he scans the industrial landscape for any sign of life. He continues his frantic search, his eyes darting between the shadows of the buildings. "If you're there, answer me," he shouts, the oppressive silence of the area only fueling his growing dread as he rounds another corner. His breath comes in ragged gasps now, sweat beating on his forehead as the adrenaline begins to fade, replaced by a cold, sinking feeling in his chest. He stops abruptly, his eyes widening in shock as they lock onto something just ahead, his expression shifting from frantic hope to pure horror. A few steps more, and his boots come to a heavy halt. There, lying motionless on the hard ground, is a pale, limp hand reaching out from behind a concrete pillar. The warrior drops to his knees beside the fallen elder, his head bowed in a silent, agonizing realization of what has transpired. The weight of his failure settles over him as he stares at the unmoving form of the man he tried to save. The two companions walk side by side through the industrial landscape, the weight of their recent struggles hanging heavy in the air as they move toward their next destination. Suddenly, the elder man falters, his strength failing as he begins to collapse, drawing a worried cry from his younger companion, who rushes to his side. He gasps for breath, his body racked with tremors as he huddles on the ground, the toll of his efforts finally catching up to him in a wave of exhaustion. Looking down at his fallen mentor, the young man's expression darkens with a somber realization of the sacrifice made on his behalf during their battle. He leans in close, speaking softly to the dying man, offering words of comfort as the elder's life force continues to ebb away into the silence. The warrior explains that it was only through the power of the elder's forged blade that the monstrous orc was finally brought down, a revelation that brings a flicker of pride to the old man's fading eyes. In his final moments, the craftsman recalls the forbidden art he practiced, a process of trading one's very soul to manifest the steel required to forge a legendary weapon. His hand reaches out one last time, trembling with the effort of final goodbye, before eventually falling still against the cold earth. He weakly extends the blade, his final act of will, urging the young man to take the weapon he poured his soul into. Accepting the heavy burden, the adventurer promises to treasure the gift, his expression hardening with a newfound sense of responsibility. As he cradles the craftsman's frail form, he offers a pained apology, admitting that the architect of this tragedy managed to escape into the shadows. The dying man's breathing becomes a ragged wheeze, yet he insists that the youth deserves to know the truth of how things used to be. He begins to recount a time before the world was governed by status screens and levels, a time before the arrival of the monstrous masters. His voice falters as he recalls the horrific day two of his companions were ruthlessly slaughtered. Stunned by this revelation, the young man demands to know why such a thing happened, only to learn that a group of thugs had descended upon them. These marauders had treated human lives as mere practice targets to test their newly acquired skills, a revelation that leaves the adventurer reeling at the senseless cruelty. He listens as the old man recounts the nightmare. Ike-san explains how he tried to drive the intruders away, but the monsters were drawn to the raw power of the skills being unleashed. The thugs returned, more emboldened than before, realizing they could use the chaos to their advantage. The leader of the group had approached him with a sickening ultimatum. He demanded that Ike-san provide a steady stream of people to be used as fodder, promising that his own group would be spared in exchange for this human sacrifice. The old man's face was etched with pure terror at the proposition. This arrangement was framed as a matter of efficiency, a way to ensure a stable supply of experience for their growing power. Ike-san could only watch in horror as the logic of this new, cruel world was laid bare before him, where lives were reduced to mere points on a scoreboard. When he hesitated, the man's expression twisted into something truly monstrous. He threatened to unleash his cruelty upon every soul in the camp, leaving Ike-san with the impossible choice of sacrificing a few to save the many. To emphasize his point, he casually discarded a life as if it were trash. Ultimately, the pressure broke him. He fell to his knees, his mind fracturing under the weight of the atrocity he was being forced to facilitate. He admitted that he eventually succumbed to their demands, his spirit crushed by the madness of the situation. He realized then that the world had fundamentally changed into a place where the weak are merely fuel for the strong. Unable to protect anyone, he became a middleman for murder, offering up lives just to keep the darkness at bay for one more day, his hands metaphorically stained with the blood of the innocent. As the story concludes, he stares down in silence, the weight of the old man's confession settling over him like a shroud. The realization that such depravity exists in this new reality is almost too much to bear, and he struggles to find words for the horror he has just heard. With his final breaths, the dying man laments his cowardice, regretting that he didn't end the thug's life when he had the chance. He is no longer afraid of the end, only of the blood that stains his soul, while his companion's fist trembles with a growing, righteous fury against the man responsible for this tragedy. His eye widens, the pupils constricting as the weight of his actions finally begins to settle in. A dark realization haunts his mind, questioning if he truly possessed the resolve to take a human life and cross that irreversible line. The memory flashes back with violent clarity, his blade carving through the air, striking down the arrogant leader in a spray of crimson. Beside him, the dying old man wheezes, confessing his own perceived cowardice and the lack of strength that prevented him from acting against the thug sooner. He looks down at the elder, who offers a faint, grateful smile, acknowledging that the young man has accomplished the justice he could not achieve himself. The elder's gaze softens as he finds peace in his final moments, his breathing becoming shallow and rhythmic as the life drains from him. Reaching for the hilt of his weapon, the adventurer counters the old man's praise, insisting that without the blade the elder forged, he would be the one lying dead on the cold ground. He firmly grasps the dying man's hand, declaring with fierce conviction that this victory belongs to both of them, a shared triumph over their shared tormentor. He cries out with a voice thick with emotion, desperately assuring the old man that his sacrifice was not in vain and that he had truly protected everyone. In response to the boy's desperate plea, the elderly craftsman offers a faint, weary gaze, his breath hitching as the last embers of life begin to fade. He lets out a soft, final sigh, a gentle smile touching his lips as he laments that, in the end, he never even learned the young man's name. The silence that follows is absolute, marked only by the weight of the adventurer's hand resting upon the old man's now still chest. As he kneels over the lifeless form, a hollow realization settles in. To this man, he was merely a nameless stranger, and he wonders what version of himself will remain in the old man's memory. He stares blankly at the ground, the crushing weight of the moment forcing him to acknowledge that he may have lost something far more precious than he initially realized. His gaze drifts to the cold steel of the blade lying nearby, the very instrument that secured a victory that now feels entirely hollow. Gripping the weapon, he makes a silent, solemn vow to continue moving forward and to survive, even if the path ahead leaves him questioning his own identity. He stands amidst the silence, the weight of the forged blade in his hand, a physical reminder of the promise he just made. Looking down at the weapon, he resolves to live with the same freedom and spirit that Ike-san and the others possessed, casting aside the shackles of his former hesitation. Moments later, he sits slumped on the cold pavement beside the still form of his mentor, the vast, indifferent sky stretching above the industrial ruins. He reflects on his own clumsiness, a quiet admission of the long road ahead as he begins to process the gravity of his new path. Elsewhere, the architect of the failed ambush erupts in a fit of primal rage, his boots slamming against the metal siding of a nearby structure. He screams into the empty air, the sting of humiliation burning far deeper than any physical wound he might have sustained. Gritting his teeth until they ache, he ruminates on the unexpected threat posed by the one he calls the appraiser. He acknowledges that while the class is notoriously weak in direct combat, its ability to strip away an opponent's secrets by seeing through their status is a dangerous anomaly he hadn't accounted for. His face contorts into a mask of pure malice, as he refuses to accept that someone so insignificant could best him. To him, the idea of a stranger risking everything for another is a pathetic miracle, an affront to his worldview that he simply cannot allow to exist. In the darkness of his mind, a cold philosophy takes root. Humans are not to be trusted or relied upon. He views the world as a place where others are merely tools or obstacles, a stark contrast to the bond he just witnessed. Turning his back on the scene of his defeat, he strides deeper into the shadows of the city, his mind already weaving a new, more ruthless plan. He decides that he will manipulate and discard others as bait, using them as stepping stones to prove that his cynical truth is the only one that matters. While the young adventurer looks toward a future defined by his new resolve, his enemy's eyes burn with a singular, murderous intent. The thug leader makes a silent, blood-soaked vow. He will hunt down the appraiser and end his life personally, ensuring that such a miracle never happens again. The adventurer swings his blade with practiced ease, the steel whistling through the air as it connects with a screeching goblin. He exhales a sharp breath, his focus absolute as he navigates the chaotic skirmish outside the park gates. With a final decisive arc of his weapon, he cleaves through the last of the immediate threats, the creature's form dissolving into the ether. The silence that follows is heavy, broken only by his steady breathing. He stands amidst the aftermath, his dual blades catching the dim light as he surveys the area. He concludes that the immediate vicinity has finally been cleared of the pest for the time being. As he carefully sheathes his primary weapon, he can't help but admire the craftsmanship of the blade Ike-san provided. Its edge remains pristine despite the carnage, a testament to the old man's skill that has significantly lightened his burden during these constant battles. He pauses for a moment, his gaze drifting toward the horizon as he processes the weight of the day's events and the toll they have taken. Turning away from the site of the skirmish, he begins to trek back toward the park. His thoughts dwell on the companions waiting there, the very people Ike-san had nearly sacrificed everything to shield from the encroaching darkness. However, the sanctuary of the park has been compromised. The lingering dark energy from the recent clash with the orc has acted as a beacon, drawing a fresh swarm of gray-skinned monsters to the perimeter, threatening the safety of those within. Despite the exhaustion weighing on his limbs from the grueling battle with the beast, he finds that these lesser creatures pose little challenge, their low level allowing him to cut through them with effortless precision as he fights to reclaim the area. He stands surrounded as the sun rises on a new day, finding the situation even more dire than before. The swarm of gray-skinned creatures has doubled in number since the previous evening, their jagged teeth bared in anticipation. Looking at the encroaching horde, he realizes this surge was inevitable. The intense energy released by his skills during yesterday's battle acted like a beacon, drawing these scavengers to the site of the orc's demise. He glances back at the makeshift shelter, remembering that in the past, it took nearly a month for such a concentration of monsters to dissipate on its own. Staying holed up for that long is simply not an option. The young man shifts his stance, gripping the hilt of his blade with renewed focus. If the monsters are drawn to the scent of his magical skills, then the solution is to suppress his output and rely on pure martial technique. With a sudden burst of movement, he lunges into the pack, his blade carving a silent arc through the air. He moves with calculated restraint, ensuring each strike is just powerful enough to be lethal without triggering a massive surge of energy. He is momentarily surprised by the efficiency of his weapon. Even with his strength held back, Ike-san's masterfully forged blade cleaves through a goblin's torso in a single, effortless stroke. His initial worry that a lighter touch might fail him vanishes as the steel proves its worth. Standing amidst the fallen monsters, he notes that these wild creatures are far less coordinated than those directed by a tamer, their movements predictable and sluggish. The skirmish ends quickly, leaving him alone in the quiet of the park once more. Over the following days, his strategy of restraint begins to yield results. The number of monsters drawn to the area steadily dwindles, dropping from 10 to 7, and eventually down to a mere 5 as the residual energy finally begins to fade. He sits in his office attire, exhaling a weary breath as he contemplates the data he has gathered. The hypothesis is confirmed. By moderating his skill usage, the monster presence has dwindled. He is the only one who truly understands the current state of affairs. His observations have revealed a pattern. Goblins consistently emerge at 6 in the morning, primarily centered around the park. They do not venture into residential areas, and once a pack is eliminated, no more appear that day. By the next morning, their remains have vanished without a trace. Standing amidst the trees in his traveling cloak, he acknowledges that the data is still overwhelmingly sparse and filled with uncertainties. There is much more to verify, but for now, the immediate danger seems to have passed. Turning toward the cluster of makeshift tents, he raises his voice to call out to the hidden inhabitants. He assures them that it is finally safe to emerge, his voice carrying across the quiet morning air. As the first few faces peer cautiously from behind the canvas flaps, he realizes that his primary mission now is to alleviate the deep-seated fear that has gripped these people. He is soon approached by the elderly Ike-san, who offers his heartfelt thanks and asks if he was injured. He reassures the old man, noting that only 2 goblins appeared today and predicting that by tomorrow, they may not return at all. The young man finds himself surrounded by the grateful group, though he quickly deflects their praise, insisting that his success is due to the quality of the equipment they provided. Ike-san, however, is more interested in the practical details, asking how the new scabbard is holding up. He demonstrates the fit, noting that the blade sits securely without any rattling or slipping. The refugees beam with pride, heartened to see that the tools they crafted are serving their protector so well. He listens as the burly craftsman praises his prowess, specifically how he cleaved the monsters in two with the sword Ike-san provided. The man, impressed by the display, invites him to test some new prototype equipment later, an offer he readily accepts. This interaction brings back memories of the revelations that followed Ike-san's passing. It was only after sharing the news of the old man's death that he discovered the truth about this community. Every single one of them, including the late Ike-san, had once been skilled artisans and craftsmen in their former lives. He reflects on how Ike-san had walked a path similar to his own, stepping back from the front lines of conflict to create a sanctuary. The old man had dedicated himself to taking in those who had lost their place in the world, providing them with a home and a purpose. Standing before the gathered refugees, he had laid bare the circumstances of Ike-san's sacrifice and the full extent of the monster tamer's villainy. Though each person processed the news in their own way, the weight of the truth hung heavy in the air between them. Despite the tragedy, the reality of the situation remains clear. Ike-san's final actions ensured the safety of the entire group. The gratitude they feel for their fallen benefactor is a tangible, undeniable force that binds them together. Before a simple stone marker adorned with fresh flowers and a humble offering, he stands in a long, heavy silence. The wind rustles the grass around the lonely grave, the only witness to his private mourning. Kneeling by the site, he pours a small libation as a sign of respect. He speaks softly to the memory of the man who saved them, reporting that another day has passed in peace without a single soul being harmed. This hard-won tranquility manifests in the daily life of the camp, where the refugees now use their diverse skills to build, cook, and support one another. Amidst the glow of the hearth and the sound of tools, he finds a sense of belonging he hadn't expected. He allows himself a rare moment of tranquility, his eyes closed as a faint smile touches his lips. He reflects on the future during this quiet interval, musing that once the threat of monsters finally subsides, he might finally be able to move on from this place. He is suddenly jolted into a state of high alert as the silence is shattered by a frantic cry echoing through the camp, warning of a monster's sudden appearance. He rushes toward the commotion where a group of terrified refugees has gathered around a man trembling on the ground. They breathlessly explain that a monstrous roar was heard coming from the labyrinthine alleys near the abandoned factory, the very site of his previous battle with the monster tamer. Realizing the danger, he offers a quick apology to the community, fearing he may have overlooked a lingering threat, and sprints toward the industrial district while the elders call out for him to be careful. His expression hardens into one of fierce resolve as he pushes himself forward, silently swearing that he will not allow another soul to perish on his watch. The desolate silhouette of the factory looms ahead, a grim reminder of the violence that occurred within its walls. With his boots pounding against the pavement, he accelerates, his focus entirely on the looming confrontation. He sprints through the narrow alleyways, his cloak billowing behind him. Suddenly, a gray-skinned goblin lunges from the shadows, its claws bared as a spray of dark blood splatters against the wall. Despite his reluctance to reveal his true strength, he raises his hands as a massive, horned beast emerges from the gloom. He inwardly curses the necessity of using his hidden powers in such a public space. With a focused shout, he invokes the Sojaku technique, sending a flurry of small, enchanted orbs flying. The projectiles hum with power, serving as a desperate deterrent against the overwhelming numbers. A sudden, sharp pang of exhaustion hits him, his eyes widening in realization as his vision begins to swim. His strength fails him completely, and he collapses to the cold ground. The terrifying truth hits him. His mana is depleted, and this mind-down state leaves him paralyzed and vulnerable. Looking up from his knees, he finds himself completely surrounded by a pack of goblins and a towering orc. Their silhouettes loom like shadows of death against the alley walls as the archers notch their arrows. Trembling with fear, he cries out in a desperate plea for help, his voice cracking. He is alone, powerless, and facing certain death at the hands of the monsters. As he huddles in terror, the archers release their volley. A rain of arrows descends, the sharp thuds of the projectiles striking the ground, and his clothing marking the end of his desperate stand. He lay defenseless as the arrows clattered around him, but a sudden shadow fell over him as a hooded figure leapt into the fray, startling the looming monster. The stranger crouched low, their voice filled with concern as they asked if he was still conscious and if he could hear them. Because of this unexpected intervention, he surged to his feet with a burst of desperate energy, his dark suit jacket whipping through the air like a wing to deflect any further harm. The hooded figure could only gasp in disbelief at his sudden, impossible recovery. His gaze was no longer clouded by the fog of exhaustion. Instead, his eyes sharpened with a lethal, focused clarity that defied his previous state of total collapse. Now standing as a bulwark between the monsters and his mysterious rescuer, he gripped his sword firmly, the arrows of the previous volley lying harmlessly at his feet. The girl behind him stared up in awe, her voice trembling as she struggled to understand who this man was and where he had come from. He stood protectively in the narrow alley, his eyes darting between the small, gray-skinned monsters and the trembling figure behind him. He asked if she was unharmed, receiving only a soft, muffled response in return. Hearing her voice, he realized she was quite young and felt a wave of relief that she appeared to have escaped physical injury. However, his focus quickly shifted back to the threat at hand, noting the unusually coordinated way the creatures were moving. His gaze locked onto the massive figure towering over the smaller goblins, its presence far more imposing than the rest. It was clear that this beast was the one issuing commands, orchestrating the ambush with a sinister intelligence. Turning back to the girl for a brief moment, he urged her to stay low and remain where she was, fearing that more arrows might whistle through the air at any second. With the girl secured for the moment, he faced his adversaries once more, knowing that the only way out of this alley was through the monsters blocking their path. He focused his mind, channeling his energy into a single point as his eye began to glow with a piercing light. The familiar sensation of his appraisal skill took hold, ready to strip away the mysteries of his opponent. A translucent window of information manifested before him, revealing the true nature of the hulking leader, a goblin general, standing at level 18. Most of its specific attributes remained hidden, but its sheer power was undeniable. The revelation sent a jolt of apprehension through him, as he realized this creature's level surpassed not only his own, but even that of the formidable orc he had previously encountered. He tightened his grip on the hilt of his blade, his mind racing as he glanced back at the trembling girl. While he considered fleeing with her, he knew that leading these monsters toward the park would only invite more trouble. The only choice was to eliminate the threat here and now. With a determined shout, the young adventurer lunged forward, closing the distance between himself and the massive goblin general. He committed himself to the assault, knowing that hesitation would be fatal against such a formidable opponent. The beast let out a deafening roar as it prepared to strike, but he was already calculating his move, utilizing his insight to predict the monster's trajectory. He focused his intent on a weak point strike, aiming specifically for the creature's left arm to disable its primary means of attack. "I've got you," he thought, his blade whistling through the air as he executed the precision strike. The monster's eyes widened in a flash of primal fury, seemingly caught off guard by the speed of the human's counteroffensive. However, the general was far from defeated, swinging its massive right arm downward in a brutal arc that forced him to shift his weight instantly. Though the speed of the counter was staggering, he remained confident, believing he could still read the rhythm of the beast's movements. Just as he prepared his next move, a second, smaller shadow erupted from behind the general's massive frame, brandishing a crude club. His eyes widened in shock as he realized the larger monster had been masking the presence of an ally. The sudden, coordinated ambush caught him completely off balance, the smaller goblin strike coming from a blind spot he hadn't accounted for. He gasped as the realization of his tactical error hit him harder than any physical blow. Panting heavily and struggling to regain his composure, he stared at the two monsters, realizing the general had intentionally used its own body as a screen to lure him into a trap. He had been completely outmaneuvered, his overconfidence leading him straight into a deadly pincer maneuver. He stands frozen, his mind racing as he stares down the massive goblin general. The realization hits him like a physical blow. The creature didn't just see through his tactics, it actively exploited them. Even with his insight skill active, the monster had managed to mask the presence of a second attacker perfectly. His body feels heavy, unable to keep pace with the sheer speed of the unfolding ambush. His gaze flickers to the shattered remains of a crude bow lying in the dirt. It was a poorly made weapon, snapping after a single use, but the lethality of the intent behind it was unmistakable. Had that shot been true, his journey would have ended right then and there, silenced by a piece of junk. Looming before him, the general is a mountain of dark, murderous intent. The monster has judged the surprise attack a success, and its posture radiates a chilling certainty. It isn't just fighting, it is hunting, and it has no intention of letting its prey escape the trap. Gritting his teeth, the young adventurer tightens his grip on his blade, sweat stinging his eyes. He forces himself to admit the bitter truth. The monster's strategy was flawless. Despite seeing the danger, his own physical reactions are lagging behind the mental processing of the threat. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, he lunges forward, aiming a heavy strike at the goblin's right shoulder. He calculates that a clean cut there might buy him the opening he needs to break the momentum of the assault. But as he commits to the swing, his eyes widen in fresh horror. Another shadow detaches itself from the periphery, a second goblin lunging with a jagged blade, catching him completely off balance. The force of the sudden movement sends him reeling backward, his boots skidding across the uneven ground. He gasps as he recognizes the new threat. It's the same creature that had fired the arrow earlier, now closing in for a melee kill. He tumbles through the air, the world spinning into a blur of gray skin and sharpened steel. The goblins press their advantage, their movements a chaotic symphony of violence that leaves him struggling just to keep his head as he crashes into the dirt. He gasps for air, his chest heaving as he scans the shadows of a narrow alley. The realization hits him like a physical blow. His narrow escape from the last strike was pure luck, and he can feel the presence of several more monsters lurking just out of sight. His eyes widen, pupils shrinking as the gravity of the situation sinks in. Every instinct screams that his usual strategy of evasion and counter-striking has been completely neutralized by the enemy's coordination. Looming over him, the massive silhouette of the general casts a suffocating shadow, making the young man feel utterly insignificant. He grips his blade with trembling hands, the silent question of whether he even stands a chance echoing in the oppressive darkness. As his mind reels, he begins to dissect his own failures, imagining a version of himself with more refined movements and a sharper, faster strike. He laments his lack of reaction speed, certain that a more skilled warrior would have already turned the tide of this ambush. His gaze falls upon the finely crafted blade in his hand, a weapon far superior to its wielder. He feels a surge of shame, knowing that even the best equipment is useless if the person holding it lacks the resolve to use it effectively. A bitter, self-deprecating chuckle escapes his lips as he stares at the ground. He takes a moment to breathe, the frantic energy of the fight momentarily replaced by a cold, hard clarity. Looking up with a newfound sharpness in his eyes, he admits to himself that he has been playing the coward, hiding behind excuses and looking for an easy way out. He stands firm, the weight of the sword finally feeling right in his hand as he rejects his previous doubts. He knows now that what he needs isn't more skill or better gear, but the sheer will to face the threat head-on. He centers himself, gripping the hilt of his blade with both hands as he prepares to go on the offensive. He realizes that he must carve out his own victory, drawing upon every ounce of strength he has accumulated until this moment. This internal resolve manifests in his gaze, his eyes narrowing with a sharp, unwavering intensity. The conditions for a transformation have finally been met, and he calls out for the power necessary to overcome the monster before him. In response to his desperate need, a surge of arcane data floods his consciousness, granting him the prestigious title of Gladiator. Along with this high-class job, his mastery over close-quarters combat, physical techniques, and instinctive reactions reaches a new level of proficiency. Armed with these enhanced abilities, he stands firm against the towering goblin general, the weight of his sword now feeling perfectly balanced and natural in his grip. He observes the beast's movements with a newfound clarity, ready to engage. As the general swings its massive weapon, he meets the blow with a precise parry, the steel of their blades clashing with a shower of sparks. He moves with a fluid grace, using the momentum of the enemy's strike to reposition himself for a counterattack. With a sharp exhale, he lashes out, his blade cutting through the air in a swift, silver arc. His movements are no longer those of a desperate amateur, but of a seasoned warrior who understands the rhythm of the battlefield. Nearby, the hooded girl watches in stunned silence as the young man she once saw as vulnerable suddenly dominates the fight. The goblin general, caught off guard by the sudden increase in its opponent's speed and power, can only snarl in frustration. He delivers a final, crushing blow that sends the massive creature reeling backward, the impact echoing through the narrow alleyway. The girl can only stare in awe, realizing that the tide of the battle has completely turned. He lunges forward, his blade carving a brutal arc through the air as it connects with the massive neck of the goblin general. The impact is devastating, tearing through flesh and bone with the force of a seasoned warrior's strike. Without missing a beat, he pivots, his movements a blur of dark fabric and cold steel as he carves through the smaller creatures that dare to close in. Each swing is calculated, a lethal dance designed to keep the swarm at bay while maintaining his momentum. The hulking leader staggers back, clutching its mangled throat as a guttural cry of pain escapes its lips. Observing the creature's struggle, he calmly remarks that his previous blow clearly hit its mark, weakening the beast significantly. His gaze hardens, blood trickling down his forehead as he stares down his primary opponent. With a voice steady and devoid of fear, he declares that it is time to bring this confrontation to its final conclusion, addressing the monster directly as the general. In response, the creature's eyes narrow, glowing with a feral, predatory light that pierces through the gloom. The air thickens with its mounting rage, a silent promise of the violence yet to come. Letting out a deafening roar, the beast summons its remaining kin to overwhelm the lone human. He stands his ground, surrounded by a sea of snarling gray skin and jagged blades, his resolve unshaken by the sheer numbers against him. He leaps into the fray, his boots finding purchase on a goblin's head as he launches himself into a series of acrobatic strikes. He knows that in a fight like this, the one who seizes the initiative is the one who survives, and he refuses to give them a moment's respite. Anticipating the desperate counterattack, he catches the massive, rusted blade on his own steel, the screech of metal on metal echoing through the corridor. He notes that he expected such a move, and with a sharp exhale, he prepares to deliver the final, decisive strike. He moves with a desperate intuition, his blade carving through the air as the screeching monsters close in. Facing down another snarling beast, he holds his ground, his suit tattered and stained with the grime of battle. With a swift, fluid motion, he parries the attack and delivers a punishing blow, sending the creature reeling. He continues his frantic dance of death, striking down one goblin after another with relentless precision. Suddenly, a chilling realization strikes him as he scans the immediate area, noticing that one of the creatures is missing from the fray. He frantically searches for the outlier, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he wonders where the final beast could have gone. His eyes widen in horror as he spots the missing goblin sprinting toward the defenseless girl huddled in the shadows. He realizes with a jolt of panic that the creature is attempting to take a hostage, a level of tactical cunning he hadn't expected from such monsters. Without a second thought, he hurls his weapon through the air in a desperate gambit. The blade spins with lethal accuracy, striking the monster just as it reaches for the girl, the impact sending it crashing to the ground. He stands trembling, his chest heaving as the adrenaline begins to fade, and he mutters a quiet prayer of thanks that he arrived just in time to prevent a tragedy. The immediate threat has been neutralized, but the toll of the battle is etched clearly across his weary face as he looks toward the girl. He watches as the massive creature gasps for air, its body mangled and missing a limb, yet it still radiates an abnormal, suffocating bloodlust. Observing the beast's unwavering hostility despite its injuries, the young man wonders what could possibly be driving such a relentless will to fight. His eyes widen in sudden realization as he senses a shift in the atmosphere, the silence between them growing heavy with an unexpected tension. As the wounded monster hunches over, seemingly at its limit, he can only stare in confusion, unsure of what the creature's next move will be. Suddenly, the silence is broken by a guttural, broken voice as the creature forces out a name, identifying itself as Goli. He recoils in disbelief, his mind racing as he tries to process the fact that the monster before him possesses not just a name, but the capacity for speech. While he struggles to comprehend the impossibility of a talking monster, the creature turns the question back on him, demanding to know his own name. In that moment of confrontation, a spectral interface flickers into existence, displaying his own status as a level 1 human, yet leaving his name a haunting void. He looked the monster in the eye, his voice steady despite the absurdity of the situation. He explained that his name was simply nameless, a fact as strange to him as it was to the creature before him. The creature struggled with the word, its guttural voice mangling the intonation as it repeated the name back in confusion. He corrected the monster, noting the slight difference in how the word should be spoken, while mysterious girl in the hood watched the exchange in silence. Suddenly, she broke the tension by hurling a sword across the stone floor, the metal clattering loudly as it slid toward him. She urged him to take the weapon, her voice filled with a desperate hope that he could defend himself. He stared at the blade, calculating the distance between himself and the weapon while the goblin general loomed nearby. The realization hit him that facing such a high-level opponent unarmed was a death sentence, yet the gap between him and the sword felt like a mile. A flicker of doubt crossed his face as he questioned if she truly meant for him, a mere level 1, to take up the blade and fight. Meanwhile, the monster stood motionless, its silence more unnerving than its previous aggression. He couldn't reconcile the creature's current, almost chivalrous patience with the way it had been ruthlessly taking hostages only moments before. Sweat beaded on his brow as he tried to use his analytical skills to peer into the monster's mind, but even his most advanced insights came up empty. He was forced to admit that he understood nothing of how these creatures thought or what their true intentions were. Steeling his resolve, he lunged forward, his boots scuffing the ground as he raced toward the discarded sword. He pushed aside his fear, commanding himself to move and not let this chance slip away. He reaches the blade just in time, swinging it in a desperate arc that severs the monster's arm cleanly. The young man stands his ground, gripping the hilt with both hands as the massive goblin stares him down, blood pouring from its fresh wound while it maintains a lethal grip on its cleaver with its teeth. With a sharp exhale, he lunges forward, pouring every ounce of his remaining strength into a final, decisive charge. The air rings with the deafening screech of metal on metal as their weapons collide in a shower of sparks. The force of the impact vibrates through his arms, the blade biting deep into the resistance offered by the creature's unnatural height. Gritting his teeth against the overwhelming pressure, he acknowledges the monster's incredible power, even as he pushes past his own limits. In a blur of motion, the duel reaches its violent conclusion as he delivers a strike that bypasses the general's guard entirely. As the massive form of the goblin general finally collapses to the ground, he stands trembling, his breath coming in ragged gasps while he surveys the aftermath of the life-or-death struggle. He stands amidst the settling dust, his breath heavy as he watches the massive form of the general begin to crumble into shimmering light. The young man observes the remains vanishing almost instantly upon defeat, a phenomenon he has never witnessed before that leaves him momentarily stunned. He feels a sudden surge of power wash over him as the last of the light dissipates, confirming his victory over the named threat and its entire pack. The adventurer marvels at the staggering scale of his growth, his level leaping from 12 to 21 in a single bound, while his various skills, from spatial awareness to swordsmanship, sharpen and evolve. He examines his blade, noting that the sheer amount of experience gained from this high-stakes encounter is far beyond anything he had anticipated. He reflects somberly on the many dangers he has faced, the brutal orc, the arrogant thugs, and the relentless monsters, realizing that each crisis he overcomes only serves to highlight his own profound ignorance in this strange new reality. He acknowledges that every time he faces the unknown, he is reminded of how much he still has to learn. His heart hammers against his ribs, a steady, rhythmic thrum of adrenaline and resolve that echoes in the silence of the aftermath. The warrior decides, with a narrowed and determined gaze, that if there is more to learn about this world, he must be the one to seek it out, no matter the cost. He is suddenly distracted by a faint glint in the debris where the general once stood, prompting him to lean in for a closer look at the mysterious object left behind. He holds the small, translucent sphere up to the light, turning it over in his palm. It looks like a crystal, yet its presence is baffling. Something so conspicuous surely would have been noticed earlier in the heat of the struggle. The realization of his surroundings suddenly snaps him back to reality as he remembers the victim of the earlier assault. He turns his gaze toward the motionless form nearby, shifting his focus from the strange treasure to the person he had fought to protect. Approaching the figure, he finds a young girl deep in slumber, her face peaceful despite the chaos that had just unfolded. He observes that she seems remarkably unscathed, with no obvious wounds and a steady, rhythmic breath that suggests she is merely exhausted rather than injured. He ponders her identity, questioning if she could be one of the refugees or perhaps a companion of the elders he had met earlier. However, looking at her more closely, she doesn't quite fit the description of the others he has encountered in the shadows of the city. Knowing he cannot simply abandon her in this desolate place, he decides the best course of action is to move her to the safety of the park. Yet, before he lifts her, a cautious instinct takes hold, and he reaches out a hand toward her to confirm her status. He activates his innate ability to see beyond the surface, murmuring a quiet apology for the intrusion. His eyes widen as the skill takes hold, his expression hardening with a mix of concentration and growing apprehension at what he might find. The necessity of the act weighs on him. If she proves to be a dangerous individual, he must know now while she is still unconscious to prepare a countermeasure. He remains poised, waiting for the hidden truths of her identity to reveal themselves through his vision. Suddenly, a surge of clarity washes over him as his discernment skill evolves, jumping from level 1 to 3 and flooding his mind with a wealth of new data. The information he uncovers is so startling that he recoils, his breath catching in his throat as he stares at the sleeping girl in utter disbelief. He stares in disbelief as the information materializes before his eyes. The girl's level is a staggering 56, and her race is revealed to be a half-elf. He can hardly process the numbers, his mind reeling at the sheer power hidden within such a small frame. As he continues to scan the data, the shock only deepens. Her intelligence stat is an astronomical 920, though her current state is listed as a total depletion of magical energy. He realizes that this mysterious girl, now lying helpless, possesses a level of magical potential that defies everything he knows about this world. Shouts echo through the dark city streets as searchlights sweep the alleyways. The pursuers are frantic, cursing their luck for losing sight of what they describe as a rare and valuable specimen that must not be allowed to escape into the abandoned district. Amidst the chaos, she sprints through the shadows, her dark cloak billowing behind her as she navigates the narrow passages. Her pursuers warn each other that she is no ordinary target, capable of wielding skills from two distinct professions, making her a formidable and dangerous opponent if cornered. Her eyes widen in sheer terror as the weight of her situation settles in, her breath hitching as she realizes how close her hunters are to discovering her position. She eventually finds a cramped alcove between stone walls, pressing her back against the cold surface and gasping for air, desperate to remain undetected until the search party passes. Sometime later, She stirs on a worn couch in a quiet, unfamiliar room, her mind racing as she tries to piece together how she arrived here after successfully shaking off her pursuers in the city. A fragmented memory surfaces of a terrifying encounter with a massive goblin general. She had been completely drained of mana and unable to move, certain of her demise until a figure intervened. The stranger had stepped forward to shield her from the beast, his silhouette etched against the looming threat as he stood his ground despite the danger. Returning to the present, she looks down at her trembling hands, the realization slowly dawning on her that she is indeed alive, saved by someone whose identity remains a mystery. She wept, the tears of relief streaming down her face as the realization that she had been saved finally took hold. Sitting alone in the quiet, rustic room, she hunched over, the weight of her recent ordeal still heavy on her shoulders. As she looked around the unfamiliar wooden interior, wondering where she had been taken, a sudden voice from outside startled her, calling out for someone named Big Brother. A man wearing a cap pulled back a curtain and greeted her warmly, noting that she was finally awake before promising to go find the man who had brought her there. Confused by the term Big Brother, she questioned who he meant, only for the man to clarify that he was referring to her mysterious savior. The realization hit her that the person who had rescued her was nearby, and she caught a glimpse of a dark silhouette carrying a blade through the doorway. Panic suddenly seized her as she realized her hair was a mess from sleep, and she scrambled to fix her appearance as the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. A calm voice then asked for permission to enter, causing her to freeze in a state of nervous anticipation as she prepared to meet her benefactor face to face. He steps through the curtain, announcing his presence with a polite greeting. Inside, the girl remains huddled on the bed, her form almost entirely obscured by the heavy fabric of her cloak. Approaching her with a gentle demeanor, he is relieved to hear her soft voice confirming that she feels much better. He continues his inquiry, asking specifically about her physical condition and whether she is experiencing any lingering pain. Because she seems to be moving with a strange stiffness, particularly around her neck and head, he leans in closer to ask if she might have sustained an injury there that they missed. She reacts with a startled gasp, her eyes wide beneath the shadow of her hood. In response to his concern, she suddenly shouts that she is perfectly fine, her voice echoing in the small room. Realizing her outburst, she immediately shrinks back, apologizing profusely for the sudden noise while he stands there, momentarily stunned by her intense reaction. As he reaches out to offer comfort, she instinctively pulls away, the movement sharp and defensive. She quickly stammers out an explanation, desperate to ensure he doesn't think her withdrawal is due to any personal dislike of him. Finally, she lowers the hood, revealing a face framed by long, pale hair that is tangled and messy. She explains with a blush that she was simply embarrassed by her disheveled appearance after waking up, a realization that leaves him feeling a bit foolish for overthinking her behavior. Understanding her need for privacy, he offers to wait outside while she finishes getting ready, provided she feels strong enough to move. She agrees, her voice small as she thanks him for his patience and steps toward the center of the room. Once outside, he leans against the wall, his expression turning serious as he reflects on the situation. He glances at the data he gathered. She is a level 56 half-elf, and he ponders how much information she truly possesses, knowing that the real challenges are only just beginning. He stands with the elderly man, his mind racing with questions about the girl and the strange reality of this world where even the displaced possess strength beyond common monsters. He expresses his desire to learn more about her and the world itself, apologizing for his sudden intensity while acknowledging that the levels of those around him are truly startling. Moving to the small dwelling, he offers a few comforts from his desk, a comb and some disposable towels, receiving a soft word of thanks from within as he explains that she is welcome to use them. He stands alone for a moment, a sense of relief washing over him that he could provide even these small necessities, despite the humble nature of the shack they are using as a temporary base. Outside, the old man explains that this place was once his home, now offered as a temporary refuge. Meanwhile, the young man emerges from the doorway, having finished his preparations and apologizing for the delay, while thinking to himself that he couldn't very well let a young girl use an old man's comb. As she steps out into the light, the girl shields her eyes, her long hair and pointed ears now fully visible as she confirms she is well enough to walk. He watches her closely, noting the lingering tension in her posture even as she expresses her gratitude for his help. She flushes a deep crimson, her expression a mix of embarrassment and intensity that catches him off guard. He can't help but wonder if her striking nature and high level are what has made her a target for others in this dangerous environment. Glancing at the time, he realizes the morning is slipping away and invites her to join him for a simple breakfast, promising that while the fare is modest and he can't offer much, the flavor will not disappoint. They walk together through the camp where the air is thick with the unease of the other refugees, all of them haunted by the memory of the previous day's monsters. He explains the community's habit of communal dining, all while silently weighing the consequences of the power he displayed during the recent battle and wondering what challenges the new day will bring. He approaches the elderly man, Ike-san, who is busy stirring a large, bubbling pot of stew. After a friendly greeting, he inquires about the morning's meal, to which the old man proudly replies that he's prepared his special, hearty flour dumpling soup. The rich, savory scent reaches the young girl, who takes a deep breath, her eyes widening in appreciation. She can't help but murmur about how wonderful it smells. Noticing her reaction, Ike-san mentions he's heard the news of her arrival and expresses his relief that she seems to be recovering well. She responds with a polite, soft-spoken thank you, acknowledging his concern. Kiyoshi then asks the old man to serve a portion for his companion as well. Ike-san obliges with a smile, handing over a steaming bowl while remarking that cooking is much more fulfilling when it's for a beautiful young lady. The girl hesitates for a moment, asking if it's truly all right for her to accept. Reassuring her, he suggests they enjoy the meal while it's still hot. She remains quiet, staring down at the warm bowl in her hands with a thoughtful expression. As they begin to eat, he explains that there's no need for concern regarding their supplies, noting that the park's emergency stores are plentiful and they've even begun cultivating vegetables in the nearby flower beds. Ike-san chimes in, encouraging her not to hold back. Looking up from her food, she meets his gaze and offers a sincere, heartfelt thank you. He blinks, momentarily caught off guard by the clarity and warmth in her voice. Nearby, a pair of pigeons forage peacefully on the ground, mirroring the quiet calm that has settled over the camp. They sit together on a weathered park bench, the steam from their bowls rising into the cool air. He takes a hearty bite, remarking on how delicious the meal is, while she remains silent, her gaze fixed on the food. Breaking the silence, she looks toward him with a soft expression, expressing her gratitude for his intervention. She admits that without his help, her fate would have been far bleaker. Her fingers tighten slightly around the warm ceramic of the bowl, a small gesture of the vulnerability she still feels. Looking up, she asks the question that has been weighing on her. Why is he being so remarkably kind? He pauses, acknowledging to himself that her suspicion is entirely justified. He decides to lay his cards on the table, explaining that his motives aren't purely altruistic. He is seeking information. She repeats the word, a hint of surprise in her voice as she seeks clarification. He elaborates, stating his desire to learn more about her and the drastic changes the world has undergone in the last 6 months. A quiet understanding settles between them as they sit amidst the park's tranquility, the weight of his request hanging in the air. She questions why he chose her specifically for these answers. While she admits she might have a better grasp of the current state of affairs than him, given that he has been asleep for the past 6 months, she remains curious about his choice. She listened intently as he explained the situation in the park, noting how the residents survived by avoiding conflict and supporting one another. He then asked if she had sought information from the others as well. He confessed that his own knowledge was limited, having only awakened a few days prior, but pointed out that she seemed far more capable than the humans and monsters he had encountered so far. Her expression shifted to one of pure bewilderment, her voice barely a whisper as she questioned his perception of her. He didn't hesitate to clarify, stating plainly that he sought the knowledge she possessed, especially since her level was significantly higher than his own, identifying her specifically as a half-elf. The mention of her heritage caused her to freeze, her eyes dilating with a mixture of shock and growing dread as she feigned ignorance, asking what he could possibly mean. Taken aback by her sudden defensiveness, he revealed that he had used his appraiser skill to check her status while she was unconscious, where her race had been clearly listed. She stood up abruptly, her posture tense, as she pointed out a glaring contradiction in his story, suggesting that his victory over the Goblin General was proof enough of what he truly knew. Finally, she voiced her darkest suspicion, accusing him of approaching her only to capture her and take her back to wherever she had fled from. She remains out of sight for a moment as Kiyoshi sits alone on the park bench, his posture tense as he tries to process the weight of his discovery. He begins to speak, perhaps trying to explain himself or offer reassurance to the empty air where she once stood. He is suddenly cut short by a soft, apologetic voice that seems to materialize from the shadows right behind him. The unexpected sound causes his eyes to widen in sheer disbelief, his breath hitching as the girl's presence registers far closer than he ever anticipated. Before he can even turn to face her, she has already closed the distance, her small form looming over his shoulder with a speed that defies his expectations. With a firm, hushed command, she tells him to remain silent, her expression a mix of desperation and resolve as she effectively takes control of the situation, leaving him frozen in place. The mysterious girl suddenly lunges, her movements a blur of lethal intent. Kiyoshi grunts in surprise, barely reacting as the air whistles past him. She continues her relentless assault, forcing him to scramble backward. He narrowly avoids a sweeping strike that shatters the wooden bench behind him, his boots skidding across the pavement as he tries to find his footing. He stares at her in disbelief, his heart hammering against his ribs. The sheer, explosive speed of her movement is unlike anything he has encountered, and he realizes with a jolt that she was aiming to knock him unconscious. He had activated his insight eye the moment she rose, but even then, he could barely track the subtle shifts in her center of gravity before she vanished from sight. Her eyes, cold and piercing, lock onto his with an intensity that seems to vibrate in the air between them. She suddenly halts her attack, her voice calm, as she observes that his movements are far too refined for a mere civilian. She flatly accuses him of lying about being an appraiser, but he desperately counters, insisting that his profession is the truth. He continues his defense, explaining that finding her was a complete coincidence. He mentions the task of bringing her back, his brow furrowed with the effort of de-escalating the sudden violence. She remains skeptical, pointing out that if he truly possessed the appraiser skill, he would be able to see more than just her surface details. She adds with a chilling logic that if she had intended to harm him, she would have done so while he was defenseless and asleep. He focuses his power, a translucent screen of data flickering into existence before his eyes. The information is startling. She is a level 56 half-elf with a staggering intelligence stat of 920. However, her status is listed as mind down due to total MP depletion, leaving the rest of her abilities shrouded in mystery. He tries to bridge the gap between them, questioning why she's pushing herself to such an extreme. He hopes that, despite the initial violence of their encounter, they might finally be able to communicate and find common ground. In response to his attempt at reasoning, she erupts in frustration, shouting that his strength makes no sense to her. She argues that it is impossible for someone with a non-combat profession like an appraiser to possess such power, but he calmly counters, suggesting there is more to his abilities than she realizes. Her resolve seems to harden as she cuts him off, muttering that she has heard enough. The sound of her teeth grinding betrays the immense pressure and internal conflict she is currently enduring. She explains that she cannot afford to waste any more time in this stalemate. Every moment spent talking is a moment her pursuers use to close the distance, and she refuses to let them catch her. Suddenly, her posture shifts, her weight dropping forward as she prepares for a desperate move. He watches in alarm, realizing she intends to force her way through him with a direct, head-on assault despite her weakened state. He realizes how incredibly stubborn she is, even when her body is at its limit. He knows that in a direct physical confrontation, he stands no chance of winning, and he desperately needs some kind of definitive proof to change her mind before things escalate further. She declares her intent to simply knock him unconscious to end the confrontation. However, when he asks for proof of his intentions, her expression softens slightly as she admits she is actually grateful for the help he provided earlier, even if she cannot trust him fully. With a final, quiet farewell, she turns and walks away into the distance. He is left alone among the park benches, watching her retreating figure as the tension of their encounter finally begins to dissipate. She continues her flight, her cloak billowing behind her as she puts distance between them. He watches her go, a look of grim realization crossing his face as he realizes he cannot let her simply vanish into the danger. A desperate thought flashes through his mind. Whatever the cost, he has to act now. He bellows a command to the system, calling for his status screen to manifest in a burst of shimmering light, his voice echoing with the urgency of the moment. The glowing interface materializes before him, displaying his level 21 status and a diverse array of jobs, including fugitive and appraiser. His attributes, led by a high attack and spirit, pulse with light as he reviews his specialized movement skills like surface walking and running, preparing to push his physical limits to their absolute peak. Sensing a sudden shift in the air behind her, she glances back, her eyes wide with a mix of confusion and growing alarm. Her boots skid against the dirt as she comes to a sudden, jarring halt, a soft gasp escaping her lips at the unexpected development. Before she can react further, he is there, his movement a blur as he intercepts her path and reaches out to steady her, his sudden proximity and firm grip forcing her to stop in her tracks. He extends his hand toward the shimmering display, his focus absolute as he prepares to utilize the information it provides to resolve the situation. He exhales a sharp breath of relief, his hand still extended to steady the situation after the frantic chase. Despite the successful stop, a cold sweat beads on his forehead as he realizes the sheer intensity of the pressure he had been exerting. It was far more than a simple aura meant to induce sleep. A notification flickers in his peripheral vision, marking an increase in his mental resistance due to the strain, but he dismisses the achievement with a weary wave of his hand. Sensing the sudden shift in the air, she looks up, realizing the crushing weight that had pinned her down has completely evaporated, and she asks if he was the one who deactivated the skill. Her eyes widen in disbelief as she scans the glowing interface before her, struggling to comprehend how a single human could possess 5 distinct professions, including titles as ominous as fugitive, and mental grasper. He explains that the confusing display is the result of a disguise skill, noting that while it masks his true identity, the sheer number of entries is bound to cause shock, especially since his name is hidden. Pointing specifically to the appraiser designation on the screen, he asks if this proof is finally enough to earn her trust and convince her of his intentions. The tension finally snaps, and she collapses forward, her strength failing as the adrenaline fades, leaving him to scramble in surprise at her sudden loss of consciousness. She regained her composure, bowing her head low as apologies poured from her lips. Despite the shock of seeing his status, she felt a deep sense of shame for her earlier hostility, especially since he had gone out of his way to help her. Her eyes welled with tears of regret as she realized the gravity of her actions, attacking the very person who had saved her life and offered her food. The weight of her mistake pressed heavily upon her, making her voice tremble with every word. She watched as he scratched the back of his head, visibly uncomfortable with such a raw display of emotion. While he was used to the dangers of the dungeon, dealing with a young girl's heartfelt remorse was a challenge he wasn't quite prepared for. He gently interrupted her stammered apologies, suggesting that her erratic behavior was likely just the result of an empty stomach. He spoke with a calm kindness, trying to ease the tension that still hung in the air. Her eyes followed him as he reached down and picked up a steaming bowl of food, his movements calm and deliberate. The simple gesture seemed to surprise her, momentarily silencing her frantic apologies. His steps toward her were the only noise in the quiet space as he approached with the meal. Each stride was steady, conveying a sense of safety that she hadn't felt in a long time. He extended the bowl toward her, explaining that hunger often clouds one's judgment and leads to mistakes that wouldn't otherwise be made. He didn't hold her actions against her, recognizing the desperation that had driven them. His words seemed to comfort her as she accepted the meal with wide-eyed wonder, her shock deepening as he mentioned that his unique set of skills allowed him to understand her situation better than most. The simple act of kindness seemed to bridge the gap of mistrust that had stood between them. She sits quietly as Kiyoshi explains that he possesses a skill allowing him to vaguely grasp what others are thinking through their movements and gestures. He reassures her that he understands she had her reasons for her earlier hostility. He continues with a gentle expression, noting that he realizes she felt the need to defend herself in such a desperate situation. He encourages her to set those worries aside for the moment and simply focus on the meal. Taking his advice, they both begin to eat. While he takes a calm sip of his soup, she watches him intently, her large eyes filled with a mixture of lingering hesitation and growing curiosity. As he chews, he reflects privately on the limitations of his mind-reading skill, suspecting that a difference in their levels prevents him from truly seeing into her thoughts. Meanwhile, she takes her first bite, her reflection shimmering in the clear broth of the bowl. A sudden, muffled sound disrupts the quiet of their meal. He looks over, startled, as a soft, choked sob escapes from the girl sitting beside him. Tears begin to well up and spill over, streaming down her flushed face as she continues to eat. The simple warmth of the food and the unexpected kindness seem to have finally shattered her stoic facade. He is caught completely off guard by this sudden display of emotion. His eyes widen in genuine shock as he realizes that she is crying uncontrollably. Despite her weeping, she continues to eat with a desperate hunger, making small, pained sounds between mouthfuls. He watches her for a long moment before gently asking if the food is to her liking. She continues to weep, the tears falling into her bowl as she manages to choke out how delicious the food is. Watching her, he can only offer a soft, understanding acknowledgement, his own expression softening at the sight of her raw gratitude. He looks away, a bandage still stark against his forehead, as a somber realization takes hold. It occurs to him that perhaps he is of little use for anything in this world besides the violence of combat. Despite these heavy thoughts, the two sit together in the dirt, finding a fleeting moment of respite in the simple act of sharing a warm meal. They sit together on a park bench, the tension of their previous encounter beginning to thaw. She offers a sincere thanks for the meal and for his assistance the day before, her voice soft as she apologizes for her earlier conduct. He waves off her concerns, suggesting that a simple exchange of information would be more than enough to settle the debt. He leans in slightly, deciding to start with the basics by asking for her name. She introduces herself as Yuka, a member of the Wings of the Bonfire. Recognizing the name as Japanese, he asks if he might address her simply as Yuka, to which she readily agrees, a small smile touching her lips. He then shifts the conversation to a more pressing mystery, asking her to explain exactly what she meant by calling herself a half-elf. Her expression turns solemn as she prepares to explain. This lineage is typically understood as a rare union between humans and elves, a demographic so small they are treated as a near-mythical rarity. Confused by this definition, he asks if one of her parents was an elf, but she quickly corrects him, stating that both of her parents are perfectly ordinary humans. She reveals this startling truth. Her condition is not hereditary, but acquired. Half a year ago, accompanied by a mysterious voice echoing in her mind. Her very physical form began to shift, transforming her into the being she is now. He stares at her in disbelief, struggling to comprehend such a fantastical occurrence. She acknowledges the absurdity of it all, noting that even the lack of pointed ears is a hallmark of her strange, half-human state. She continues her explanation, noting that her hair was a simple brown only half a year ago, but the transformation altered her very pigment. He listens intently, his mind racing as he connects her story to the magic power and MP values he saw on her status screen, questioning if they are linked to this change. In response, she clarifies that while magic power is tied to one's race or profession, MP is a universal force present in all living things, even if they cannot perceive it. She explains that the frequency and intensity of skill usage are directly dependent on these remaining reserves. Though passive, always active skills are a different matter entirely. To illustrate her point, she describes how active skills require a conscious effort and a drain on one's MP, whereas passive abilities, like enhanced strength or speed, provide a constant benefit without the same immediate cost. He nods, thanking her for the insight and drawing a parallel to his own flat surface running ability, realizing how these mechanics govern his own movements. She further elaborates that truly understanding the nature of magic power and MP is what allows a person's skills to deepen and evolve. She admits that she herself was unaware of her own magical potential at first, but the difference in performance between having that awareness and lacking it is staggering. As he processes this, he glances back at his own status display, which currently shows a state of MP depletion. He can't help but wonder if he, too, will one day manifest the true magic power she describes. Curious about the practical reality of these mechanics, he asks her what it actually feels like to suffer from MP depletion or a mind-down state. The question causes her to flinch, a look of genuine discomfort crossing her face as she struggles to find the words to describe the harrowing sensation. She speaks of a state known as mind down, her eyes downcast as she recalls the crushing weight of total MP depletion. Her description of the state is harrowing. It is the literal bottoming out of one's internal reserves, leaving the body a hollow shell. She confirms his suspicion that this vulnerability is tied to her heritage, noting that while humans might endure such a state, elves and half-elves are far more fragile. She explains that because her kind relies so heavily on magic power just to sustain their daily lives, losing that vital energy causes their physical capabilities to plummet, rendering them helpless. Her confession weighs heavily on him as he realizes the gravity of the situation, wondering why she would reveal such a fatal weakness to a stranger. His silence is broken when she meets his gaze with an unwavering look of trust, explaining that she cannot keep secrets from her savior. She is visibly relieved when he solemnly vows to keep her secrets safe, a promise that brings a sense of peace to them both as they sit in the quiet. He contemplates the sheer intensity of the struggle she must have endured to be pushed to such a desperate limit, while she watches him with quiet curiosity. He sits on the park bench, listening as she apologizes for the sudden shift in conversation. She acknowledges that while she's the one providing information as a reward, she has something she wants to ask him as well. In response, he agrees that it's only fair since he's been the one asking all the questions so far. He encourages her to ask anything she likes, which seems to catch her off guard for a moment. He listens as she takes a deep breath, leaning in with sparkling eyes to ask him to tell her his name, provided it's something other than his own name, a confusing request that leaves him momentarily stunned. Her request makes him smile warmly, as he realizes that a proper introduction is indeed the foundation of any good relationship. However, as he prepares to answer, he finds himself hesitating. She waits expectantly, her hands clasped, while he rubs the back of his head, struggling to find the right words for a name he can actually use. Internally, he is confronted by a system notification regarding the name field, indicating that there are currently pending options. He realizes with a start that he doesn't actually have a name to give her at this moment. He notices her watching him with a puzzled expression as the silence stretches on, the wind blowing softly through the trees in the distance. She continues to wait as he looks down at his identification card, struck by a chilling realization. His own name has completely vanished from the document, leaving him truly nameless in this world. He stares at the blank card, explaining the inexplicable phenomenon to Yuka. She asks if the cause is truly unknown, and he admits that while it's hard to believe, it's simply too specific to be a mere coincidence. He hadn't thought much of it before, dismissing it as just another bizarre occurrence in a world gone mad. Sitting side by side on the park bench, he notes that while he isn't currently inconvenienced, the real problem is being seen as a lunatic every time he tries to introduce himself. Yuka quickly reassures him, waving her hands frantically as she insists she doesn't think that of him at all. Suddenly, a shimmering interface manifests in the air, displaying a notification regarding the name field. It informs him that there are currently pending options available for selection. He blinks, sensing something is happening again, while Yuka continues her thought. She expresses her dilemma, wondering what she should call him if he has no name. Responding with a casual shrug, he tells her she could decide on a name for him herself. As he speaks, the system interface updates, acknowledging his approval and preparing to select a name at random from the pending list. The suddenness of the system's intervention sends him into a panic, and he shouts out in frustration at the voice from the heavens that keeps interfering. His outburst startles Yuka, who jumps back with a small yelp, asking what's wrong. Ignoring his protest, the system proceeds with the update. A final message appears, stating that a name has been selected and the record is being updated. His eyes widen in pure shock as he sees the result of the random selection, the realization of his new identity hitting him like a physical blow. He stands frozen as the system finalizes the process, the words Nanisher manifesting in the air between him and the kneeling, defeated goblin. The creature can only mutter in its final moments, acknowledging the name that has been bestowed upon its conqueror. Startled by the sudden notification, he frantically summons his status window, his eyes wide with disbelief. Beside him, Yuka watches with a tilted head, her voice soft as she asks what has happened to cause such a panicked reaction. He stares at the interface, the name Nanisher burning into his mind as he recalls the Goblin General's dying words. The monster had indeed called him that, a cruel irony that the system has now codified into his very identity. Reaching out a trembling hand, he scrolls through the updated display, which confirms his gender as male and his profession as a mere normal class with a basic job. The simplicity of the status screen feels like a mockery of the life-or-death struggle he just endured. Turning back to his companion, he explains the situation, theorizing that the voice from the heavens must have mistaken his lack of a name for the name itself. He sighs, wondering if the system simply misinterpreted the Goblin General's final address as his true title. His expression flattens into one of weary resignation as the reality of his new moniker sinks in. The absurdity of being officially recognized as nameless by the world itself leaves him feeling more like a glitch in the system than a hero. Seeing his dejection, Yuka tentatively asks if it would be all right for her to use the name as well, addressing him as Nanashi-san. He gives a small, reluctant nod, deciding that for now, a temporary name is better than none at all, even if it is a bit on the nose. A genuine, if slightly embarrassed, laugh escapes him as he admits that hearing the name spoken aloud by someone else feels even stranger than seeing it on a screen. Despite the oddity of it all, the tension of the battle finally begins to fade, replaced by a quiet moment of camaraderie. He stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation settling over him. It was the first time since his awakening that anyone had addressed him by a name, a simple act that felt profoundly significant in this strange new reality. Seeing his contemplative state, the young half-elf spoke up, asking if she was truly the first person to call him Nanisher since his arrival in this world. She seemed curious about the weight her words carried, noting her own heritage as she observed him. She continued her thought, explaining that for someone who had been asleep for 6 months only to wake up in a world that had moved on without them, losing their identity in the process, it was as if they had been born all over again. He listened intently, his eyes widening as the logic of her perspective took hold. With a bright, encouraging smile, she pushed the idea further, suggesting that receiving a new name in this new world made him a completely different person, a literal rebirth that separated him from whatever he used to be. This realization triggered a sudden, sharp burst of laughter from him, catching her completely off guard. Between his chuckles, he admitted that she was right. He was indeed a different person now, and the thought seemed to bring him a strange sense of relief. As his laughter subsided, he looked toward the horizon, reflecting on how he had spent so much time chasing the ghost of his past self, wondering who he was and cursing his own perceived mediocrity. Now, he finally felt that he had truly been born into this new existence, free from the shadows of his previous life. Turning back to her, he clarified that while he was embracing this new life, he wouldn't discard his past. Both the man he was and the man he is now are parts of the same whole. He offered her a sincere word of thanks, leaving her slightly flustered as she worried she might have said something rude. Sensing the shift in mood, he asked if there was anything else she was curious about. She immediately perked up, asking for his age. When he revealed he was 22, she did the math, realizing he was 4 years her senior, as she was only 18. He was just about to suggest their next course of action when a sudden, violent tremor interrupted him. The ground shook with such force that he wondered if it was an earthquake or the arrival of a monster. But Yuka's gaze was fixed on the distant fountain. As they steadied themselves, she reassured him that monsters shouldn't be appearing on the surface here, prompting him to ask about the significance of the named goblin they had just overcome. She explained that named monsters are rare, appearing only under specific conditions, and their defeat usually grants a temporary reprieve for monster spawns, a fact that surprised him, though her warning that this piece was fleeting hung in the air. Urging him to follow, she insisted that seeing the source of the disturbance would provide the answers they needed, and he quickly agreed. In the distance, the forest erupted in a cacophony of startled cries as birds took flight, fleeing from an unseen force. Suddenly, the earth beneath them buckled and tore open, forcing them to scramble back as a massive structure began to emerge. Before them stood a colossal, intricately carved stone door, rising from the ruins of the ground as he stared in disbelief, questioning what this new anomaly could possibly be. He recoiled in surprise as the massive structure settled, but Yuka remained eerily calm, her gaze fixed on the stone. She whispered that her suspicions were correct, prompting him to shout a warning for her to stay back and not approach the unknown monolith so recklessly. Beyond that threshold lay a realm untouched by humanity, a literal breeding ground for monsters and a den of demonic energy. The air around the cold stone seemed to vibrate with the weight of the secrets it held. Ignoring the danger, she slowly turned her back to the looming gate, her silver hair catching the light as she prepared to deliver a revelation. Standing tall before the colossal, ornate archway, she finally gave the mysterious structure a name. It was a dungeon. The declaration hung in the air, marking the beginning of a new and perilous journey. They stood before the massive, ornate gate that had materialized out of nowhere in the middle of the city. The young man stared in disbelief at the intricate carvings, while his companion explained that such structures, known as dungeons, had been appearing across the globe for the past 6 months. This was only the second one she had encountered firsthand. He couldn't help but envision the dangers lurking within. Vicious monsters guarding overflowing treasure chests and deadly traps hidden in every shadow. He wondered aloud if the interior was more akin to a sprawling building or a subterranean labyrinth. Sensing his growing unease, she offered a calm reassurance, explaining that this particular dungeon had not yet become active. They observed the silent, imposing entrance as he sought clarification on what an inactive state truly meant. She confirmed that, according to her understanding, the gate currently functioned as a one-way passage. While someone could potentially enter, nothing from the inside could yet cross the threshold into their world. She elaborated further, noting that even if the dungeon's activity were to commence, the threat remained contained for the time being, as monsters would not be able to simply pour out into the streets. Wei questioned the suddenness of its arrival. She admitted that while certain conditions must be met for a dungeon to manifest, she was likely the catalyst for this specific event. The revelation left him stunned and searching for answers. She spoke of the necessity of monster subjugation, specifically mentioning the formidable Goliath. He listened intently, the weight of the situation settling over him as he realized the scale of the threat they faced. Overcome with guilt, she bowed low in a formal apology, confessing that her reckless use of a skill designed to lure powerful, named monsters was the true cause. She had continued to activate the ability without regard for the consequences, driven by a desperate hope that he would eventually find her. She watched as he processed the weight of her confession, his hand moving to his chin in deep thought. He mused that if her theory held true, then the situation was even more complex than they had initially realized. He continued his reasoning as they stood in the quiet expanse of the park, suggesting that a stronger skill might naturally attract more powerful entities. It was a simple logic. The greater the lure, the more formidable the predator that answers. The young man posited that this outcome was far more likely than a mere coincidence, a realization that left his companion wide-eyed and speechless. He was beginning to see the patterns behind the chaos, connecting the dots of their shared ordeal. He broke down the timeline, noting that both her arrival and the appearance of the monstrous Goliath in this abandoned sector happened on the very same day. If the passage of time is a fundamental rule for monster manifestation, then the sequence of events was no accident. His analysis deepened as he considered the conditions required for a named monster to emerge, such as a specific number of goblins being defeated or a set duration passing since their initial spawning. It seemed that the relentless culling of the lesser creatures might have been the very trigger that summoned their leader. He looked her directly in the eye, his voice firm as he concluded that the battle was an inevitability for everyone involved, himself included. He made it clear that the weight of these events did not rest solely on her shoulders, offering a sense of shared responsibility. The impact of his words left her stunned, her hand rising to her mouth as she struggled to process this sudden absolution. The silence between them grew heavy with the weight of his unexpected kindness. She finally found her voice, softly calling out his name as he began to turn away. In that moment, the barrier between the mysterious girl and the weary adventurer seemed to thin, replaced by a fragile, newfound understanding. She stands there, a bit flustered by his observation that she is either incredibly considerate or simply clumsy. She admits she isn't sure herself, prompting him to chuckle and remark that her versatility is quite the double-edged sword. She listens as he steers the conversation back to the matter at hand, asking for confirmation that defeating a named monster is indeed what triggers a dungeon's manifestation. She nods, explaining that she had heard of a similar occurrence in a dungeon she had previously explored. He falls silent, contemplating the gravity of her words and wondering how he would have fared in this crisis had she not been present. While he is genuinely glad he was able to assist her, a shadow of doubt begins to creep into his mind. He gazes at her back, realizing that the depth of her knowledge is staggering for someone who has only been active for 6 months. It seems impossible for anyone to gather that much information in such a short span of time. He continues to scrutinize her, weighing her undeniable strength against the sheer volume of information she possesses. The suspicion that she is hiding a significant secret about her true identity grows stronger, and he can't help but wonder if he is being played. Despite these logical concerns, he finds that he cannot bring himself to think ill of her. There is no hint of deception in her eyes, and he feels that by revealing his own status, he has established a baseline of mutual trust. She remains still under his gaze, unaware of the internal conflict he just resolved. He ultimately decides that, for the time being, it is safe to place his full trust in her. She is caught off guard when he suddenly snaps his fingers as a new thought strikes him. He realizes that if they're discussing named monsters, there is another crucial detail he needs to address immediately. He reaches into his pocket and produces a dark, polished sphere, presenting it to his companion. He admits he isn't quite sure what it is, prompting her to lean in with wide-eyed fascination, asking if she might take a closer look at the beautiful object. As she gently cradles the object in her palms, she realizes it is far more than a simple gemstone. She identifies it as a magic stone, a concentrated orb of arcane energy that feels heavy with latent power. Hearing this, he explains that he found the item lying on the ground immediately after the Goblin General was defeated. The revelation causes her to gasp in shock, her eyes darting between him and the stone as the weight of the situation begins to settle. Suddenly, the stone erupts with a blinding, white radiance that forces them both to shield their eyes. The intense light washes over the small room, vibrating with a sudden, violent surge of energy that neither of them expected. The brilliance then coalesces into a focused beam, shooting across the space and striking the far wall with a resonant thrum. In response to the energy, a massive, ornate gateway manifests, its surface covered in intricate geometric patterns that seem to pulse with a rhythmic, heartbeat-like sound. They stand in silence before the towering structure, watching as the very air around the door begins to throb with life. With a grim expression, she looks toward the gate and announces that the dungeon has officially begun its activity. He can only stare in disbelief, his mouth agape as the reality of what they have triggered sinks in. Her gaze becomes piercingly intense as she explains that the stone was never just a trophy. It was the key required to initiate the dungeon's awakening. She clarifies that such unique items are special drops, appearing only when a named monster is slain, confirming his earlier suspicions about the link between the two. She begins with a heavy heart, explaining that the stone acts as a key to the dungeon the moment it is touched by someone possessing magical power. With a look of deep regret, she apologizes for her carelessness in accepting it without warning him of the potential consequences first. Her words cause him to clench his teeth as the weight of the situation sinks in. He realizes that if the stone had been harmful to magic users, the damage would have been irreversible, and he blames his own negligence for handing over an unidentified object so freely. His concern grows as she reveals that once a dungeon awakens, a ruler will eventually emerge to lead the monsters within. He quickly draws a parallel, questioning if this entity is similar to the Goblin General they previously encountered. She shakes her head, clarifying that this is something far more sinister, a king of its kind, a terrifying being from a different dimension entirely. Behind her, the looming shadow of a monstrous, horned beast serves as a grim reminder of the threat they now face. She continues her explanation, describing how these kings lead their subordinates to the surface, driven by an instinct to conquer and dominate the surrounding territory. The vision of a monster horde swarming the land underscores the gravity of her words. Her warning leaves him staring in horror as the realization hits. If such a creature emerges, everyone currently in the park will be defenseless against the onslaught. He turns back to her, listening intently as she admits there's only one way to prevent the impending catastrophe. She declares with fierce determination that they must enter the dungeon and neutralize it before the king can manifest and the situation spirals beyond their control. She has made her point clear, and the weight of her words hangs in the air as they stare at the sealed entrance. He concedes, realizing that if the threat had already manifested, the world outside would already be in chaos. Continuing her explanation, she details that the king resides in the deepest level of the dungeon. If it hasn't yet emerged, it likely exists in an embryonic state, an egg, or a vessel awaiting its time. She believes that if they can reach this core and neutralize it now, they can prevent the catastrophe entirely. He listens intently, the gravity of the mission sinking in. Despite the uncertainty of what lies ahead, he resolves that they have no other choice but to act. The path forward is dangerous, but the alternative is far worse. He declares his determination, vowing to face whatever monsters or traps the dungeon might hold. A small, knowing smile touches her lips, She had expected nothing less from him. The decision is made. They will conquer the dungeon. The ornate seal on the massive doors stands as the final barrier between them and the unknown depths. 3 days pass in a blur of preparation. Supplies are gathered and packed, every necessity accounted for as the hour of their departure draws near. As he fastens his traveling cloak, the elderly refugee watches with a heavy heart, questioning if he truly intends to go through with such a perilous journey. He confirms his departure, explaining to the old man that while they might have a small window of time, the lack of certainty makes every moment precious. The elder can only offer a weary sigh, unable to hide his concern. Before he leaves, the old man pulls him aside, speaking in a hushed tone. He insists that his warnings and worries are strictly for the girl's benefit and implores him to keep their conversation a secret from her. He remains silent, absorbing the weight of the old man's hidden anxieties. He stands firm, the decision made. There is no more time for hesitation. They must move quickly. Yuka looks up at him, her eyes wide as she acknowledges his resolve with a sharp nod. Turning his gaze toward her, he suggests that once her strength has fully returned, it would be best for her to depart from this place. The suggestion catches her off guard, her expression shifting to one of quiet shock. She immediately protests, reaching out as if to stop him from leaving. She argues that she is willing to stay until she is completely healed and offers to share everything she knows about the dungeon to assist him. He remains silent for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. He knows she has her own circumstances and that this location is becoming increasingly dangerous. He questions whether she truly has the luxury of being dragged into his personal struggles. Despite his internal conflict, he warns her not to lose sight of her own objectives. As they stand apart, he privately acknowledges the selfishness of his own path. Later, as he prepares to depart, he meets with the village elders and craftsmen. They remark on his clumsy but determined nature, expressing hope that the gear they labored over will serve him well in the trials ahead. The young man tries to express his gratitude, but they quickly cut him off. They insist that the debt of gratitude belongs to them, not him. The village's artisans had responded to his desperate plea with incredible dedication. In just 3 days, they scoured for materials and forged the finest equipment possible, pouring their skill into every stitch and plate to ensure his survival. While waiting to reach full strength, Nanashir observes Yuka's transformation. She has dedicated herself to helping the villagers, stirring large pots of stew and sharing meals with the elderly as a way to express her gratitude to them and to him. He realizes his own recovery is lagging, a lingering consequence of overextending his magical reserves. His quiet contemplation is interrupted when a local man, Kawada-san, begins teasing him. The elder compares Yuka to an angel and asks if she has developed feelings for her savior. He sputters a flustered denial, reminding the man they have only known each other for a few days, while Yuka remains focused on her meal, seemingly unbothered. He had also braced himself for a tearful plea or a demand to accompany him into the depths, especially after his blunt dismissal earlier. Instead, she surprises him with a soft expression of thanks, clinging to his arm with a blush that speaks of a deep, quiet affection. Her gentle acceptance leaves him more unsettled than an argument would have. Moments later, the time for departure finally arrives. A sturdy boot meets the ground with a resonant thud, marking the end of his respite. He notes with a hint of surprise that his resolve is firm, devoid of the hesitation that usually plagues such transitions. Fully clad in his custom-forged armor and a sweeping dark cloak, he stands at the threshold of the dungeon. Ike-san offers a final, somber farewell, pleading with him to avoid unnecessary risks and return to them in one piece. With a solemn nod, he acknowledges the weight of the old man's concern before turning his back on the village. He reaches out toward the towering, intricately carved doors of the labyrinth. His hand hovers just inches from the cold metal, a gesture that represents the definitive first step into his new reality. The air around the entrance feels heavy with the promise of the trials to come. With a look of grim determination, he stares ahead with unwavering intensity. He whispers a final command to himself to move forward, his mind now fully committed to the singular goal of dungeon conquest. Every fiber of his being is tuned to the challenge ahead. He plants both hands on the massive gates, pushing with his full weight to force them open. However, the expected movement never comes. The doors remain stubbornly fixed in place. Confusion replaces his determination as he strains against the immovable barrier, wondering if some hidden mechanism or lock is barring his path. He stared at the dark, swirling magic stone in his palm, recalling Yuka's claim that it was the key. If her words held true, following the proper procedure with Goliad stone should grant him entry into the dungeon from the outside. As he approached the massive, silent gates, the elderly refugee called out, warning him that his efforts were futile. The old man explained that these doors remained sealed to all except those who fulfilled a very specific set of conditions. Before the conversation could continue, Yuka emerged from the shadows, her presence startling the old man. Turning his attention to her, the adventurer pressed for an explanation regarding the mysterious requirements for entry. In response to her presence, the colossal stone doors groaned and began to grind open, a sound that echoed through the clearing. She calmly observed that the manifestation of magic power was the catalyst for the ancient mechanism. The young man stood in awe as the path cleared, though his mind raced with 1,000 new questions. She further clarified that under normal circumstances, an individual lacking magic power would find themselves physically barred from entering the dungeon alone, as if blocked by an invisible wall. Reaching out, he felt the strange, humming resistance of the unseen barrier she described. She confirmed his suspicion with a simple nod, watching as he tested the limits of the magical field. Without hesitation, she stepped through the threshold, her body passing easily through the barrier. He followed close behind, his boots clicking against the stone floor as they transitioned from the safety of the village into the unknown depths. As they moved deeper, she mentioned a single alternative method for those without magic to gain entry, a revelation that caused him to rub his temples in frustration. The complexity of the dungeon's rules was proving to be far more taxing than he had anticipated. He watches as a gloved hand is extended toward him, a silent invitation hanging in the air. Yuka explains that the only way for someone without magic to enter is to join the party of someone who has already manifested it. She formally extends the invitation, asking him to join her. He realizes this was her plan all along, and she apologizes, admitting she kept it a secret until the last moment because she feared they might choose to leave her behind to protect her. With a weary sigh, he admits he's been completely seen through in such a short time. She offers a playful giggle, noting that she has been observing him very closely. Suddenly flustered, she turns her head away sharply, leaving him blinking in confusion at her sudden change in demeanor. The elderly Ike-san asks if she is truly certain about this path. She confirms her resolve, explaining that she must go to repay the kindness shown to her, while privately reflecting on how the village craftsman had silently maintained her gear. He finally concedes, admitting defeat with a small smile as he reaches out to accept her hand. Looking her in the eye, he promises to repay this debt, a vow she meets with a bright, enthusiastic smile and a request for them to work well together. As their hands meet, a shimmering magical interface confirms the pact, officially binding them as a party for the journey ahead. He takes a firm step forward, the weight of his new responsibility settling on his shoulders. Behind him, the elderly refugee calls out with a desperate plea, begging him to keep the young girl safe at all costs, his voice trembling with the fear of what might happen to her in the depths. As they reach the threshold of the dungeon, the young girl waves a cheerful farewell to those staying behind, her voice bright with optimism as she announces their departure. He, however, remains stoic, offering a solemn promise to return safely and fulfill the old man's request before they venture into the unknown. With their departure finalized, the massive stone doors grind shut with a heavy, final thud, sealing them within the darkness. The two companions stand before a heavy stone door that has just groaned open. The girl suggests they move forward, and her partner gives a firm nod of agreement. Beyond the threshold, a long, wide stone staircase descends into the depths of the earth, carved into the natural rock. As they begin their descent, the atmosphere shifts. She remarks that it feels like entering an entirely different world, admitting she would have felt uneasy coming here alone. They continue their steady pace down the steps. He observes that the area is surprisingly well lit, but she quickly tempers his optimism, reminding him that this is already a monster's lair and the light could be extinguished at any moment. He acknowledges the danger, urging her to stay alert. Reaching the base of the long staircase, they find themselves in a transition area between the masonry and the raw cavern. She calls out to him to ensure they remain close. Ahead of them lies a dark, arched passage leading deeper into the unknown. From the shadows, faint, glowing points suggest something might be watching from the gloom. Facing the dark tunnel, the adventurer takes charge, stating he will lead the way. His companion softly agrees, trusting his judgment as they prepare to enter the heart of the dungeon. Their boots strike the uneven ground of the cavern floor, the sound echoing as they take their first steps into the darkness. He pauses at the edge of a stone corner, his senses sharpening as he peers into the gloom of the corridor. Behind him, the young girl waits in silence, her eyes wide with anticipation as they navigate the artificial depths of the dungeon. As they move forward, he explains the nature of their current environment, noting that the monsters inhabiting a dungeon are restricted to the race of the key holder who defeated the previous master. Right on cue, a pack of small, gray-skinned goblins emerges from the shadows, their jagged weapons glinting in the dim light. Focusing his gaze, he activates his appraisal ability to gauge the threat. A translucent window flickers into existence, revealing the lead creature to be a level 8 goblin with no specialized skills, its physical attributes appearing mediocre at best compared to a seasoned warrior. He realizes that he can see the full status of every enemy before them. While level 8 isn't entirely negligible for a common monster tamer, the fact that these creatures lack any inherent skills makes them far less dangerous than they initially appear. Turning slightly, he instructs his companion to keep a watchful eye on their rear while he handles the group ahead. She nods in understanding, and with a swift, decisive step, he launches himself toward the snarling pack. The warrior moves with a fluidity that surprises even himself, his body feeling remarkably light as he closes the distance. He delivers a crushing blow to the first goblin's face before spinning to kick another, the impact sending the creature sprawling across the stone floor. Continuing his relentless assault, he slams a third goblin into the ground with overwhelming force. As the remaining monsters recoil in fear, he draws his blade in a single, smooth motion, ready to end the skirmish. With the threat neutralized, he stands amidst the fallen creatures, the silence of the dungeon returning. He offers a quiet, almost apologetic word as he sheaths his weapon, his focus already shifting back to the path that lies deeper within the tunnels. He watched as the creature's remains began to crumble, noting how differently monsters perished here compared to the surface. Within moments, the gray-skinned bodies vanished entirely, leaving nothing but a faint haze in the damp air. Impressed by his efficiency, she offered a word of praise, though he remained grounded, reminding her that this was only the first floor of their descent. He listened as she expressed genuine surprise at his versatility, marveling at how he could utilize multiple professions so seamlessly. He offered a questioning look when she hesitated, but she quickly brushed it off with an apology, urging them to refocus on the dungeon raid ahead. As they approached the threshold of the next level, she warned him that stronger, higher-tier species might begin to appear from the second floor onward. He froze suddenly, his keen ears picking up the distinct sound of numerous footsteps echoing from the darkness ahead. He remained motionless at the top of the stone stairs, tension rising as the mysterious footsteps abruptly ceased, leaving them in a heavy, expectant silence. He reacted instantly, his hand flying to the hilt of his blade as a gray-skinned creature lunged from the shadows of a jagged rock. Beside him, the girl cried out a warning, sensing even more movement approaching from the depths of the corridor. Heavy, clawed feet slammed into the dusty floor, the sound echoing through the narrow passage as the reinforcements arrived. A chorus of guttural shrieks filled the air as a massive pack of goblins swarmed forward, led by a hulking brute brandishing a crude, spiked club. They stood their ground, surveying the sheer number of monsters before them. He remarked on the unusual size of the group for such a shallow level of the dungeon, while she theorized that they had stumbled upon what was known as a spawning ground. He narrowed his eyes, realizing the danger of leaving such a force behind them. He declared that they must eliminate the entire swarm now, as dragging this many enemies into the lower floors where even stronger threats awaited would be a fatal mistake. His gaze fixed on the leader, a level 15 hobgoblin whose stats flickered into view, revealing a dangerous ability, the power of reinforcement. She explained that the creature's skill allowed it to summon even more of its kind to the fray, making it a priority target. He nodded in grim agreement, acknowledging that letting the battle drag on would only invite disaster. She stepped ahead of him, her voice calm but firm as she claimed this fight for herself. She insisted on demonstrating her capabilities now, believing that understanding each other's combat styles was essential for their survival in the trials to come. She steps forward confidently, telling Nanashur to leave the situation to her. He agrees, curious to see a demonstration of her hidden abilities. Reaching into her cloak, she produces a small, dark orb and explains her intent to thin the enemy's numbers. Her companion watches, puzzled by the strange object in her hand. As the monsters screech and lunge, she remains perfectly still, the orb beginning to glow and hover weightlessly above her palm. With a sharp, focused gaze, she unleashes the weapon she calls Suma. The orb streaks through the air like a comet, tearing through the front line of the goblin horde. The impact is devastating, sending dark ichor and limbs flying in a series of violent bursts. Behind her, the young man watches in stunned silence, barely able to process the sudden carnage. She explains that this is a skill of her jewel user class. While it consumes a significant amount of mana and is difficult to master, she can currently manipulate magic stones with the speed and precision of bullets. He considers her words, noting that while it's different from the traditional magic he imagined, it's an incredibly potent and tricky profession. However, the distraction of the explanation proves dangerous. As he stands lost in thought, two goblins leap from the shadows behind him, their claws bared. She cries out his name in a desperate warning. While she watched from a distance, the young man found himself surrounded. He noted that while more of the creatures were swarming, their coordination was amateurish compared to the general they had faced before. With a swift motion, he drew his blade, ready to meet the clumsy assault. He didn't hesitate, his blade carving a lethal arc through the air that caught the lead attacker across the face. The creature's screech of pain was cut short as he pivoted, already tracking the next threat lunging from the shadows with a crude club. His eyes narrowed as he observed their movements, realizing that despite their sloppy teamwork, these were no mere mindless beasts. There was a calculated edge to their aggression, a sign that they were being directed by a more sinister intelligence. The warrior became a whirlwind of steel, his movements fluid and precise as he cut down the swarming monsters. Each strike was a testament to his experience, leaving a trail of fallen foes in his wake as he cleared a path through the chaos. He then reached for his trump card, a heavy, mechanical gauntlet that hummed with latent power. This was the fruit of the refugee's gratitude, a specialized tool he now unleashed to turn the tide of the battle once and for all.